Okay. Good afternoon. This is a public review session for the New York City Planning Commission. Today is Monday, January 29th, 2018, and the time is 1:05. A quorum is present. The first item on the agenda is a certification for a zoning map amendment and site selection in Queens Community District 4. Making her first presentation with City Planning is Kathy Coe of the Queens office.
Hello, good afternoon, Commission. It's actually not a site selection, it's just a rezoning from at the property located at 4031 82nd Street. So the project area is located in Western Queens, Community District 4, which is located just south of Community District 3 and east of Community District 2. The project area is also located a block northeast of the 11-story Elmhurst Hospital, which rises to about 180 feet. The area is well served by mass transit, including the 82nd Street Jackson Heights station along the number 7 subway line, located just directly north of the project area. And the 74th Street Roosevelt Avenue Transit Hub is located just under half a mile west of the project area. And the Long Island Railroad Port Washington branch also runs through the district. The project area consists of a portion of a block of block 1493, lot 15. It is an irregularly shaped corner lot located in an R6 zoning district with a C13 commercial overlay, which is mapped at the time of the zoning resolution in 1961. The dotted outline here indicates the proposed rezoning district boundaries covering a portion of lot 15. The applicant proposes to rezone the project area to a C45X district, which is an R7X equivalent. The Elmhurst portion of the surrounding area borders the Jackson Heights neighborhood, loosely separated by Roosevelt Avenue to the north of the project area. And the area has a vibrant mix of commercial and residential uses, with commercial overlay districts lining major commercial corridors, concentrating local retail and offices along Roosevelt Avenue and 82nd Street. Residential uses in the area contain a diverse housing stock, including 6 to 7 multifamily pre-war elevator and walk-up buildings, 2 to 3 story multifamily attached row houses, as well as 1 to 2 family detached houses. And pictured here again, just south in the community facility blue, is the Elmhurst Hospital, standing at 11 stories. The project area, which has frontage on 82nd Street, Ithaca Street, and Baxter Avenue, formerly consisted of 1 to 2 story local offices and retail, as well as the vacant Jackson Heights Cinema, which had been standing vacant since 2014. And you can see that pictured here, although the site has been demolished fairly recently within the last portion of 2017. And the project area is located on a block that fronts Roosevelt Avenue and 82nd Street, 2 major commercial corridors. With a vibrant commercial mix, the area experiences heavy foot traffic and is well served by public transit, with the entrance to the 82nd number 7 subway line station located at the northern end of the block at the intersection of these 2 major corridors. The block where the project area is situated is bounded by Roosevelt Avenue, which is a wide street, and 82nd Street, Ithaca Street, and Baxter Avenue are all narrow streets. Open space within immediate vicinity of the proposed project area includes 2 small triangle parks just directly south of the project area at the intersection of Ithaca Street and 82nd. We have Dunningham Triangle, and then just northeast of the block at 83rd Street and Baxter Avenue, there is the Manuel de Dios Triangle as well, both operated by the Department of Parks and Recreation. If we zoom out a little bit, we get a sense of the other supportive districts that the project area lies within or is in close proximity to. Outlined in the blue shading here, the project area lies within the 82nd Street Business Improvement District, which includes properties along 82nd Street, between Ithaca Street, and then just north of 37th Avenue. The proposed project area, outlined in red, is located in the 82nd Street bid and is supportive of the extension of commercial uses along that corridor. Outlined in the yellow shading is the Jackson Heights Historic District, which spans a number of blocks just north of Roosevelt Avenue, 1 block north of the project area. This historic district was designated by the New York Landmarks Preservation Commission in 1993, and the northern portion of the bid lies within this historic district. And again, the commercial mix in the area is largely made up of local retail and office uses of both brand name and small business natures serving the local community. So these site photos show all 3 street frontages where primary pedestrian entrances would be located or accessed from along 82nd Street and Baxter Avenue. So in this first photo, we're looking at the frontage on Ithaca Street and Baxter Avenue. And the preceding photos show the corridor along 82nd Street. And we're also showing here views from Baxter Avenue, which would also have pedestrian access as well as a parking entrance. So the applicant proposes 2 actions. First is a rezoning of the portion of the block on 1493, lot 15, from an existing R6 district with a C13 commercial overlay to a C45X district, again, which is an R7X residential equivalent. The C45X district line would be mapped 180 feet south of and parallel to Roosevelt Avenue. There is also an R7X district located just 6 blocks west of the project area, which was established in 2007, located also right by the Roosevelt Avenue subway station and transit hub, and it is an equivalent district that anchors higher density in a transit-oriented nature on a block entrance of a subway line. And in conjunction with this rezoning, the applicant proposed to establish within this proposed C45X district a mandatory inclusionary housing district with options 1 and 2. The MIH district would be coterminous with the rezoning boundary. So with option 1, 25% of residential floor area would be made affordable for residents with incomes averaging 60% AMI, with a minimum of 10% of housing to be affordable at 40% AMI, as well as option 2, where 30% of the residential floor area would be made affordable for residents with incomes averaging 80% AMI. And the AMI for CD4 is roughly $47,404. So moving on to the proposed rezoning and establishment of the MIH area would facilitate the development of a new 13-story building covering the entirety of lot 15 with primary frontages along 82nd Street and Baxter Avenue. The new building would consist of approximately 120 units, including 30 to 36 affordable units under the proposed MIH options. Roughly 2,000 square feet would also be dedicated to community facility use, as well as roughly 40,000 square feet of commercial uses. And there would be approximately 128 parking spaces located in the subcellar. So the ground floor plan shows primary pedestrian entrances to ground floor retail uses along 82nd Street, and the community facility space and residential lobby would also be accessed along Baxter Avenue. And as well, you can see in the gray here is where parking and loading would also be accessed. This slide just further indicates the organization of uses within the proposed development. Again, 128 parking spaces provided in the subcellar, commercial uses in the cellar first and second floors, as well as community facility use on the first floor, and then residential uses occupying floors 3 through 13. Looking north, the first 2 floors of community facility and commercial are proposed to rise 2 stories and then provide a setback along Ithaca Street and 82nd Street before rising to a maximum base height of 105 feet at the 9th floor. The building is a setback 15 feet at the 9th floor along Baxter Avenue before rising to a maximum building height of 145 feet at the 13th floor. And these drawings and renderings are for illustrative purposes, but this final rendering shows what the proposed actions could facilitate at the intersection of Ithaca Street and 82nd Street. And it shows how the first 2 floors would rise 2 stories with a setback before rising to the maximum height. And that concludes my presentation.
Questions from the commission? Commissioner Delahoo's.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. So can you maybe describe a little bit what kind of outreach the developer did with the community to get to this proposal?
Sure.
Considering it's a pretty significant change.
Yes, the applicant has been meeting with the Community Board 4, as well as the BID and the local incoming council member Moya regularly. And the MIH options have been developed through guidance from the local the council member.
It would be helpful when this comes back to know, I'm not aware of too many affordable housing projects in Community Board 4 in Queens. And so this represents a really significant potential development for the community in terms of affordable housing. And given the AMI levels that you outlined, I'm wondering why option 2 is even on the table.
Sure.
Hi, I should first note that I live very close to here, so I'm very familiar with this district. A few issues, perhaps because I know the area quite well. The increase in FAR on the commercial and the need for more significant loading and unloading is something to think about, particularly along Baxter, which gets really, really backed up. I'd just like to know how they intend to move those large trucks in and out. One thing to note on the site plan, I don't know if we can go back to that. Yeah, actually, further. Yeah, okay. So I am aware of conversations that have occurred that looked at the potential closing of Ithaca Street between 82nd and Baxter, which is really an underutilized connection. I know in other neighborhoods, they have found ways to reclaim some space like that, and this is certainly a neighborhood that is in great need of space, and the kinds of tenants at this location, will draw quite a number of people. And so that could be an opportunity to consider as we look at this as well.
Sure.
The other is about historic context. 82nd Street, particularly, you showed the historic district, really is a tremendous example of a commercial district with wonderful historic context. And so I'm, as the community board considers that, I know other buildings have been very sensitive to that context. And so I'm curious sort of how this design relates to that. It doesn't seem to at first glance, but I'd like some, sort of thinking around that, or just some feedback on that.
Sure. Yeah, I can ask the applicants about that for sure.
And then last, the small retailers versus big retailer question. I know that, it's not within our purview per se, but I would be interested. We see a site plan that's illustrative, showing smaller spaces on the ground floor, and what is the plan for, the distribution of those spaces with respect to large and small retailers. Is there a tenant in mind here that would take space? I mean, are we seeing what we're going to get, what they anticipate, or do they have a tenant in mind that would result in a different kind of floor plan?
Sure. Okay. I can ask the applicants about the tenants that they have in mind and how the programming would work.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for your first presentation. Sure. I'm just struggling with the land use rationale for a 13-story building when, in fact, it's on all narrow streets. The block is on a wide street, but the actual site is on narrow streets. And if the closest building with the same zoning is 6 blocks away to the east, that doesn't really give neighborhood context, at least to me. Are there other buildings in the immediate neighborhood that are almost to the 13 stories? Because it feels like even in the massing study that they presented, it's just standing out there alone.
Right. Yeah. I think on the massing that we showed, it was looking north, but just one block south is the Elmhurst Hospital, which rises to 180 feet. And this proposed development is to rise 145 feet. So that would be the closest building that's in a similar scale to, or in the ballpark of this proposed development. Otherwise, yeah, around the adjacent blocks are largely 6 to 7 story residential pre-war buildings. But the hospital would be the closest.
And if I may just follow up, I mean, my mental image of that neighborhood is in fact the 6 and 7 story historic buildings.
Right.
And just on first blush, this does not seem contextual at all.
Yeah, I actually had exactly the same comment, so I won't belabor it, but except that I point out that it's essentially double the height of the R6B buildings immediately across the street on Baxter. It just looks like I need some more work to understand how this is the appropriate scale at this location, notwithstanding the important public benefit of getting some affordable housing in the project. I wonder, the illustrative massing that we're being shown, is that basically how you could fit this number of square feet onto that site, or are there other massings that are possible?
That's all the applicant has provided me with thus far. I can reach out to see if they have other alternative massings that they've been working on.
Okay,
Yeah,
that'd be helpful.
I can get back to you on that, for sure.
Other questions? Yes, Vice Chair Knuckles.
The community facility space, which is, I think it says it's just under 2,000 square feet, is there a tenant in mind for that space, or is that kind of just a space that doesn't face the main corridor? And
Yeah, according to the applicant, they have a local nonprofit in mind to occupy that space, so they do have a name in mind.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I thought of one other technical one. Is this, so it looks like the parking spaces below grade will be, are those accessible by an elevator? Doesn't look like there's room for a ramp here. Is that a ramp or an elevator?
Yeah, it would be located in the subcellar, so there would be, actually, I can get back to you on the
Okay.
exact
Yeah.
sort of operations
So-
to get the cars.
So that's another element of Commissioner Ortiz's question about traffic on Baxter. It was the potential for backups as people are waiting to get in and out of the garage, because pretty large garage.
Right, okay, I'll get some more information on that.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Delos.
And that kind of triggered something for me, especially given where the loading dock is in relation to where the retail spaces are. Like, what's the internal connection? Because right now it doesn't seem as though, I mean, we don't know, but
Sure.
right now it doesn't seem like it'd be very helpful to those retail spaces.
Sure. Again, I can get you some information on how circulation would happen on the subcellar in order to get, to see where loading docks are located.
Other questions? Okay, the application is certified.
Thank you.
The second item on the agenda, page 18, is a certification for special permits in Manhattan Community District 6. Nabila Malik of the Manhattan office is here to present.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a private application by the Kips Bay Towers Condominium, Inc. for special permits pursuant to Section 1345 for 2 separate at-grade parking lots servicing the North Tower and the South Tower of the Kips Bay Towers Condominium in Manhattan Community District 6. Specifically, the applicant seeks 2 special permits, one to add 10 and legalize 8 existing parking spaces to the lot at the North Tower, and to add 4 and legalize 15 existing spaces to the lot at the South Tower. So 23 of the 37 total spaces to be added to the parking lots have existed and been in use by the building's residents for nearly 15 years as a result of the lots being restriped by the site's prior management to accommodate additional spaces, but without obtaining proper agency approval. The condominium site is in red, it's bounded by 1st and 2nd Avenues and East 30th and 33rd Streets, and is located in Kips Bay in an R8 zoning district with a C25 commercial overlay portion to the north of the site. The Kips Bay area is predominantly residential with a collection of large medical institutions located along 1st Avenue, including NYU Medical Center to the east of the site in blue. The closest subway station is the 6th line at Park and East 33rd Street, and the M15 Select bus service also runs along 1st and 2nd Avenues. For some additional context, there is a rezoning application across the site on the north side of East 33rd Street that was certified 2 weeks ago. The site, designed by I.M. Pei in 1961, is approximately 330,000 square feet, contains two 21-story residential towers, a north tower and a south tower, with about a total of 1,100 residential units. The site is serviced by 3 parking facilities, one at-grade parking lot at the north tower with a legal capacity of 50 assigned parking spaces, one at-grade lot at the south tower with a legal capacity of 50 spaces, and a central below-grade parking garage with 300 spaces total for transient and residential accessory parking. The garage is operated by a third-party operator unrelated to the condominium. The first photo here is looking south onto the north tower from East 33rd Street, and the other is looking into the north parking lot from the west. You can see NYU's Medical Center right behind it. The north lot, about 27,000 square feet, is located between the north tower and East 33rd Street. East 33rd is 80 feet wide westbound and has 3 travel lanes and 2 lanes for on-street parking. The lot is serviced by 2 one-way curb cuts, with the entering curb cut located to the east. The applicant proposes to increase the number of spaces by 18 from the permitted 50 for a total of 68 spaces, with 8 of the 18 spaces to be legalized in this application. 4 spaces would be designated as ADA accessible and would be located adjacent to curb cuts leading to the North Tower's front entrance. The first photo is looking north onto the South Tower from East 30th Street, and number 2 is looking into the south parking lot from the northwest. The south lot, also about 27,000 square feet, is located between the South Tower and East 30th Street. East 30th is 80 feet wide eastbound and has 3 travel lanes, a bike lane, and 2 lanes for on-street parking. The lot is serviced by 2 one-way curb cuts, with the entering curb cut located to the west. And the applicant proposes to increase the number of parking spaces by 19 from the permitted 50 for a total of 69 spaces, with 15 of the 19 spaces to be legalized in this application. Like the north lot, 4 spaces would be designated as ADA accessible. The parking spaces are not rented to or used by the public. There will be no change to the existing curb cuts, and the current configuration of the lots can accommodate additional spaces without increasing the size of the asphalt surface. The project will also include additional striping for pedestrian crosswalks, bike racks, and 2 speed bumps in each lot. In order to address the findings of Section 13455 for existing parking facilities, the applicant undertook a parking study and examined the change in residential units and parking spaces during the study period, which was a period of 10 years, in order to determine whether or not the proposed addition of 37 spaces is reasonable and not excessive in relation to recent trends in the area. The maps indicate the project site and study area boundary. The map on the left shows the 10 parking change sites, and the one on the right indicates the residential change sites. The study concluded that there has been an increase of 274 parking spaces and an increase of 1,694 units during the study period, so the residential growth parking ratio is 16%. 20% is the maximum permitted as of right ratio for Community District 6. So the applicant is seeking special permits pursuant to Section 1345 for the north and south parking lots at Kips Bay Towers. Thank you.
Questions from the commission? Okay, pretty straightforward. The application is certified.
Thank you.
The third item on the agenda, page 94, is a certification for zoning map and zoning text amendments and a special permit in Manhattan Community District 3. Xinyu Liang of the Manhattan office is here to present.
All right. Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a application by 14th at Irving LLC and New York City Economic Development Corporation, EDC, for approval of a zoning map amendment, zoning text amendment, and a special permit to facilitate the redevelopment of a 21-story mixed-use commercial development on a city-owned site located at the south of East 14th Street between 3rd and 4th Avenue in the Union Square neighborhood of Manhattan Community District 3. According to EDC, the proposed actions will be necessary to accomplish the project's goal, which include creating a 21st century technology hub that provides job training, startup office space, traditional office spaces, as well as an engaging ground floor retail use that will enhance the pedestrian experience of the neighborhood. The proposed project is anticipated to be completed by the end of 2020. To provide you some background first, the unrestricted disposition of the entire project area was approved by City Planning Commission in 1983 with no end user specified. The project area comprised of 2 tax lots. Lot 55 on the East 13th Street frontage was sold to Help USA, a nonprofit organization to construct a supportive housing called Genesis Building. In 1993, the PC Richards building was constructed on Lot 16 along East 14th Street frontage. On November 2015, EDC announced an RFP that sought respondents willing to redevelop the PC Richards building into a 21st century technology hub. The site, which is under the jurisdiction of DCAS, is intended to be leased for a period of 99 years to EDC, which intends to assign said lease to RAL Development Services, LLC. EDC will thereafter administer the lease. Currently, the development site is leased to PC Richards Department Store. The lease will expire at the end of February 2018. The project area, marked in red dashed line on the left of the image, was originally zoned in C61 district. After a series of rezoning in 1985 and 1995, the project area is currently located in 4 zoning districts as shown in the diagram on the right, including C64 Special Union Square districts, C63A districts, C61 and C62A districts. The project area and much of the surrounding area is located in high-density commercial zoning districts. These commercial districts permit commercial, residential, and community facility uses. Additionally, the Special Union Square district runs west from Irving Place that regulates building envelopes, street wall transparency, and ground floor uses are always the intention of encouraging appropriate development of the Union Square neighborhood. The prevailing building form in the surrounding area, as you can see in the image, is mid to high-rise commercial, multifamily, residential, and community facility education towers. Retail uses are in abundance in the surrounding area. The NYU Residence Hall and the Palladium Hall is immediately to the west and east of the proposed development site and has a height of 20 stories and 16 stories respectively. The Con-Ed building across East 14th Street rises to a height of 24 stories with a 482-foot tower, and the 4 Zackendorf towers each rise to 27 stories. The project area is in a single zoning lot comprised of 2 tax lots, each 150 feet wide and 103 feet deep. The Lot 55 along East 13th Street is improved with the Genesis building built in 1994. It is a 12-story brick building providing 94 supportive housings and services. The development site, Lot 16, along East 14th Street is improved with the 2-story PC Richards building built in 1993. The distance between the two existing buildings is about 64 feet 6 inches, which is currently used as the rear yard for Genesis building. One thing to mention is that the applicants propose to redevelop only the PC Richard building site. There will be no change to the housing and supportive services in Genesis building. The proposed development will be an approximately 209,000 zoning square feet commercial development and will have a FAR of 6.8 over the entire zoning lot. The existing Genesis building have a FAR of about 3.2. In total, the FAR for the proposed development and the existing Genesis building will be 10 over the entire zoning lot. The development site will be subject to a disposition agreement for a 99 years ground lease. The lease will restrict property to some specific programs in each type of spaces. The retail use on the base will include a food hall with restrictions on booths to encourage smaller and entrepreneurial retailers and bring the community and residents into the building. The workforce development space on 3rd through 8th floor will be reserved at a discount for workforce education providers. For the first 25 years, it will be rented by Civic Hall or a similar uses. So Civic Hall provides co-working, event, and digital training space for people who are interested in using of technology to solve public interest problems. And within the workforce development spaces, the event space will cater to the building tenants and will be made available to community organizations at reduced rate or free of charge. And digital training and the digital skills training space will provide classes for nonprofit and for-profit organizations with scholars made available to local residents. The startup office space on the 9th through 13th floor will be available for young companies that have graduated from Civic Hall, incubators, or co-working space to have private flexible offices with shared amenities and flexible lease. On the top, from the 14th through the 20th floor will be traditional office space with smaller floor plate. The overall building height will be about 286 feet. The building will have 21 floors, a cellar, and a subcellar. On the ground floor, a one-story terrace is proposed to partially extend to the property line, and the rest of the land in Lot 16 will become a landscape open space shown in green color on the ground floor plan on the left that provides use and access to residents for Genesis building. On the left shows the existing condition of the rear yards, and on the right is a preliminary proposed design. The applicant seeks 4 actions from city planning. The application proposed to remap the entirety of the project area to a C64 zoning district. As you can see in the map on the left, the C64 district already exists on the northwest portion of the project area, as well as around the Union Square Special District shaded in gray. According to EDC, the proposed zoning map amendment to extend the C64 district to cover the entire project area is consistent with the surrounding zoning districts, uses, and build form. Additionally, the area is well served by mass transit, and East 14th Street is a 100-foot wide street that provides vehicle and pedestrian access across Manhattan. Secondly, the application seeks to amend Appendix F of the zoning resolution to establish a MIH area over the project area. Please note that the proposed development does not contemplate residential uses. However, because there is a substantial increase in permitted residential capacity due to the proposed rezoning, the MIH program applies here. Thirdly, the application is requesting a zoning tax amendment that modifies the zoning resolution 74721 so that the project area is eligible for the bulk waivers. Specifically, the zoning resolution 74721 will be updated so that the zoning lots less than 40,000 square feet but over 30,000 square feet and fronting a wide street in a 664 district in Manhattan Community District 3 can benefit from the bulk waivers. Lastly, the application is seeking the 74721 special permit to allow 2 bulk waivers to modify both the height and setback requirements and the required rear yard equivalents. The proposed development has a straight wall that rises 13th floor before it setbacks 10 feet, then rising again to 19th floor, setting back 6 feet, then rising to its maximum height of 286 feet. The second waiver being requested is a relief from 60-foot rear yard equivalent requirements. The application is requesting a waiver of 8 feet to allow a 52-foot deep open area. On an as-of-right basis, 664 zoning districts requires front setback of 15 feet on a wide street begins at 85 feet or 6 stories, whichever is less. The sky exposure plan begins at 85 feet, shown in the left diagram. Instead, the tower can set back 10 feet from the wide street and rises without setback, shown in the middle diagram. EDC states that the proposed development, shown on the right, requires a larger floor plate in order to maximize community event space and allow for a walkable and desirable footprint for the workforce development and startup office space. According to the findings provided, the requested waivers allow for a better distribution of the bulk on zoning lot and surrounding development. Absent the requested waivers, the proposed development will have an initial setback lower than its immediate neighbors with multiple setbacks and will be 3 stories taller. Additionally, the proposed development is located in the Union Square neighborhood and fronting on the East 14th Street, which is a 100 feet wide street that will not be overwhelmed by the proposed 13-story street wall and the overall building envelope. I would like to conclude my presentation with 2 renderings. This is a bird eye view facing east along East 14th Street with the 27-story Zackendorf Tower on the front and the 480 feet Con-Ed towers across the proposed development. And this is another bird eye view facing west along East 14th Street. Thank you.
Questions from the commission? Commissioner Deloze.
Hi.
Hi.
A couple questions.
Yes.
One is, given that this is a 99-year lease and that there's obviously public benefit intended for this project, what's the ongoing mechanism for the community to give input into this project over the course of the lease? Has that been determined, do we know?
I will have to get back to you on these questions.
Okay. And then it would just be helpful to have, when it comes back, more information about the nature of the programming. I love the color codes, that's great. But the nature of the programming and the resources to support it. Is it the market rate components of the project that are subsidizing the more public benefit pieces like that? That would be helpful to understand, especially and who the intended beneficiaries of that are, especially given the fact that it's between 2 NYU facilities. There may be a mismatch between who the beneficiaries are intended to be versus who's immediately located next to the property.
Okay.
Thanks. Other questions? Commissioner Levin.
I had those questions as well, and I'm curious to know, in addition, once we get an understanding of what the immediate vision for the building is, also how the lease agreement or other documents surrounding this will enforce that into the future, because we all know that real estate takes twists and turns and unexpected things happen, and so we want to know, I think we want to be sure that the public purposes that are reflected in this project get realized in an appropriate way. And I think I probably know the answer to this question, but from a land use and zoning perspective, I'm curious if no changes are contemplated for the Genesis building.
Yes.
Why is that tax lot being included in this project?
Because the Genesis building and the PC Ridge site are located in one zoning lot.
Well, I understand that. Well, they are now.
Yes.
Actually, no, they're not. They're one zoning lot, but they're in two zoning districts.
They're in four different
Four zoning.
zoning districts, two tax lots.
The gist
but
of my
one
question
zoning
is,
lot.
why are we upzoning the Genesis site?
So that PC Ridge sites will be able to use the additional floor areas that will generated by the PC Ridge, the Genesis building site.
Yeah, so they're selling air rights. I noticed in the EAS that the city retained the potential for capturing
Yes.
new development rights created by zoning. So really what we're doing is making the bank for this project. I guess we'll have to wait for the public process. I know that there's, it's going to be a lively public review for this one. And to the extent that scale becomes a question, I don't know if that's going to come back to us as an issue. But I'd be curious to know what the building would look like if it were, if we only rezoned the development site,
Okay.
and whether the project could work at that scale.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Efron.
I suspected we would hear this when it comes back to us, but just to be more specific, in addition to what mechanisms the city has with regard to the success of this, what the rights are of the lessee if it's not successful, and whether this converts to just traditional market rate office space or not.
Other questions? Okay, a very complex and exciting proposal to create a tech hub is now certified.
Thank you.
The fourth item on the agenda, page 134, is a certification for a special permit in Manhattan Community District 2. Sylvia Lee of the Manhattan office is here to present.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is a private application for the grant of a good faith marketing special permit to allow use Group 6 retail uses in the rear portion of the ground floor and the cellar in an existing 5-story building located at 85 Mercer Street within an M15A zoning district in the Soho Cast Iron Historic District, Manhattan Community District 2. The site is currently improved with a 5-story loft-style building constructed in 1920. Shown here is the front facade of the ground floor on Mercer Street. Note that the front portions of the ground floor are permitted to have retail uses through prior actions, as noted in your briefing sheet. The space subject to the requested special permit is located in the rear of the ground floor and cellar. As shown on the area map, the project site is located on the west side of Mercer Street, mid-block between Spring and Broome Streets. The site is located within an M15A zoning district, which permits light industrial and commercial uses as a right up to 5 FAR. Use Group 6 retail uses are not permitted as a right below the level of the second story in buildings over 3,600 square feet in lot coverage in the M15A district. The surrounding Soho neighborhood is a dynamic mixed-use area. Many ground floors along Mercer Street, as shown on the area map with asterisk, have been converted to retail uses over the years. The zoning lot of 85 Mercer Street measures approximately 5,000 square feet with about 50 feet of frontage on Mercer Street. The upper floors of the building are legalized lofts and are occupied as residential co-ops. The ground floor contains 2 existing retail spaces in the front and a vacant unit in the rear, shaded in blue. On the left is the cellar plan, on the right is the ground floor plan. The vacant unit was acquired by the applicant in 2013. The applicant proposes to convert the vacant rear unit, as well as the rear portion of the cellar to use Group 6 retail use, and combine the converted ground floor space with one of the existing retail space in the front to create a larger retail space totaling about 3,642 square feet. Here's a section showing the requested use Group 6 retail use waiver in the rear of the ground floor and cellar levels. The existing retail space located at the southwest corner of the upper floors of the building would not be affected by this application. To facilitate the proposed retail use, the applicant requests a special permit under Section 74-781 of the zoning resolution, where certain findings regarding good faith marketing efforts need to be made. Since June 2013, the applicant advertised the availability of the cellar and ground floor space of the building for as-of-right uses, and most recently at a rate of $70 per square foot for a period of over a year. The applicant's marketing efforts include advertisements in citywide and local newspapers, marketing through brokers, and outreach to industry groups. According to the applicant, despite these efforts, there had been no demand for long-term use of the vacant space for as-of-right uses as of the date of the filing of this application. The applicant's statement of findings and sample marketing materials are included in your briefing packages. That's it for the presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Commissioner Levin.
Sylvia, do we know what happened to the tenant in the ground floor residential space and whether they were in occupancy when the applicant purchased the unit?
The applicant stated that by the time they acquired the unit in 2013, the vacant had already been vacated.
It was already vacated.
But we can ask the applicant to look into the historic tenancy.
Okay, yeah, and then the related question is whether that was a rent stabilized unit.
Okay.
And, the circumstances under which it was vacated, if it was, in any reasonable period of time.
Okay.
Commissioner Arfon.
I would just note that among the applicant's information was a letter from an industrial broker. And reading between the lines and with direct lines, it seems pretty clear, as I think some of us would have assumed, that $70 a square foot is too high for any consideration of a market rate for industrial space in that neighborhood. And I just think it's worth going on the record and noting that.
Other comments? Commissioner Levin.
Well, related to that, I think the same letter notes that there are no new tenants for industrial space in that area, and it just reinforces what we all know, which is that the zoning in this area is broken and we need to fix it.
Commissioner Dweck.
I'll just comment, Commissioner DeLuz reminded me that it used to be $80, the going rate on the advertisements, so they've actually cut it down to 70. And so, yeah. Still no takers, right.
Even at 7. Needs to be 12.
Or right, not a happy project, but I think we all know it really needs to get done.
Questions on this application? Okay, it's certified.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Okay, don't go anywhere, Sylvia. The fifth item on the agenda, page 177, is a certification for a zoning map amendment in Manhattan Community District 2, and Sylvia will again be our presenter. This is 180 Avenue of the Americas. Here we go.
This is a private application seeking a zoning map amendment to rezone portions of Manhattan Block 504 from a C15 commercial overlay to a C25 overlay to allow a use group 9 dance studio and to legalize a physical culture establishment within a newly constructed mixed-use building located at 180 Avenue of the Americas, also known as 1 Van Dam, in the South Village neighborhood of Manhattan Community District 2. On the slide is a view of the building on the Avenue of the Americas looking northeast. The dance studio and the physical culture establishment are proposed to occupy portions of the ground floor and cellar level of the building. The project site is located in the South Village neighborhood between Soho to the east and Hudson Square to the west. The area surrounding the project site contains a mix of residential, commercial offices, hotel, retail, and community facility uses. Buildings range from townhouses, tenements, mid-rise industrial lofts that have been converted to offices or residential use, and newer high-rise residential and hotel buildings. Many of the surrounding buildings house commercial uses on the lower levels. Project area and the surrounding South Village neighborhood is zoned R72 with a C15 overlay along Avenue of the Americas and Spring Street. The C15 overlay typically allows for local retail uses, including neighborhood grocery stores, restaurants, and beauty parlors. When mapped in an R7 district, the maximum commercial FAR is 2. In C15 districts, use group 9 dance studio use is not permitted as a right. Provisions that allow for the BSA special permit for PCE use is also not applicable. The special Hudson Square District, M16, is located to the west of the project site, across the street from the Avenue of the Americas, and permits a wider range of residential, commercial, and light manufacturing uses, including the proposed uses in the subject building. As shown on the photos, the project area primarily includes 3 properties. The proposed development site at 180 Avenue of the Americas. On the photo, you can see the newly constructed building. 107 Spring Street at the corner of Avenue of the Americas and Spring Street, which is owned and occupied by God's Love We Deliver. And 203 Spring Street, which is improved with a 6-story building with ground floor commercial use and residential units above at the other corner of Spring Street, fronting on Sullivan Street. As shown on the zoning change map, the proposed rezoning will replace the C15 overlay on these properties with a C25 overlay. The rezoning also includes minor adjustments to the zoning map to eliminate C15 overlays on adjoining buildings that are exclusively residential, including 3 properties fronting on Sullivan Street. As shown on the zoning comparison table, the regulations of the 2 commercial overlays are largely identical, except that C25 overlay permits a wider range of commercial uses. Here are illustrative ground floor and cellar plans. The building includes approximately 8,574 square feet of commercial floor area in the building base, divided up into 3 commercial spaces. On the left side is the ground floor plan. On the right is the cellar plan. The applicant proposes to include a use group 9 dance studio, which is Physique 57, on portions of the ground floor and cellar, shaded here in blue, and the gym switch, shown in yellow. Physique 57 is currently located across the street from the proposed development site at 161 Avenue of the Americas in the Hudson Square Special District, and is seeking to relocate within the surrounding neighborhood. It will occupy about 3,516 square feet of floor area on the ground floor and will be accessed by an entrance on 6th Avenue. During DCP staff review of the application, it came to our attention that since August 2017, the gym switch has been operating in one of the commercial spaces, absent a PCE special permit from the BSA. Which is the space shaded here in yellow. The Department of Buildings has been notified of such noncompliance. Other aspects of the building and other buildings within the project area are not expected to change as part of the proposed rezoning. In sum, the action necessary to facilitate the proposed development at the proposed site is a zoning map amendment to rezone portions of Manhattan Block 504 from an R72C15 zoning district to an R72C25 zoning district to facilitate inclusion of a use group 9 dance studio and a legalization of a physical culture establishment. That's it.
Commissioner Irfan.
I thought this made a lot of sense, and then I happened to be on my way from the subway here and saw an ad for Physique 57, which really looked like they were advertising a gym. So why is there a distinguishing between a dance studio and a physical culture establishment? And can you just help us out? If you have weights and you're dancing, is that not considered a physical culture establishment?
I believe that the Department of Buildings would have a better answer to that, but based on the existing certificate of occupancy of the building that Physique 57 currently locates in, it's characterized as a use group 9 dance studio. However, if the proposed rezoning is granted, the applicant has the option of also applying for a PC special permit at the BSA for Physique 57.
I'd also note that another section of our older zoning resolution that is a little bit out of date is this notion of the physical culture establishment. And as we're looking at portions of the zoning resolution that perhaps could be modernized to enhance job creation, to take impediments out of the way, the PCE requirement is one that we're seriously looking at. Commissioner Levin.
Yes, it's another example of obsolete zoning. I think neither of these activities even existed when the use groups were created. And so DOB we're all faced with trying to cram new activities into old definitions. And the PC, the physical cultural establishment application, came around in the day when there were no gyms. There were just massage parlors. So it's a whole different world, and I'm glad you're working on fixing it up.
Were they known as physical culture establishments?
Commissioner Ortiz.
I would second that, and I'm glad to see that the city is looking at ways to expand the definition of retail that might go on the ground floor. I'm curious about whether there'll be transparency at the ground floor of these spaces. Presumably other kinds of retail uses could one day locate there as well. And I know we've, there are transparency guidelines through HPD, and we've incorporated them into other rezonings. And this area strikes me as, particularly wanting of a great ground floor retail environment. So I would hate to see a brick wall. So I'd be curious sort of what the plan is for that.
I can ask the applicant to provide some more updated photos of the building since the building has already been constructed. I believe that large portions of the ground floor is transparent, and one of the 3 commercial spaces will be occupied by active retail use.
Okay, thank you.
I actually walked by the building on Saturday, and it's a glass activated, currently empty with the exception of the entry to the PCE. Okay, the application is certified.
Thank you.
The 6th item on the agenda, page 190, is a referral of a zoning text amendment in Manhattan Community District 4. Annie White of the Manhattan office is here to present.
Do I need to? Okay. All right. So good afternoon, commissioners. This is an application for a text amendment to modify section 9332 of the Special Hudson Yards District, Manhattan Community District 4. So this is the section that regulates floor area transfers and the contribution in kind authorization for Hudson Yards, and the Department of City Planning is the applicant for this text amendment. So for some background, the Special Hudson Yards District was adopted in 2005 with the intention of creating a mixed-use, medium to high-density business district with an extensive open space network. The primary open space is the Hudson Boulevard and Park, which I've outlined in the zoning map here in red. So it's a linear north-south park that will be bordered by a tree-lined boulevard that upon completion runs from West 33rd Street to West 39th Street, and then mid-block between 10th and 11th Avenues. So phase one of the park, which runs from 33rd Street to 36th Street and includes what we refer to as blocks 1 through 3, was acquired by the city for redevelopment and opened to the public in 2015. Phase two, which I've indicated here in the red outline, runs from West 36th to West 39th and includes what we refer to as blocks 4 through 6. It is not yet under construction, and lots in phase two are in private ownership and are subject to the special regulations that are the subject of this text amendment. And those regulations were included to facilitate these blocks' improvement as the boulevard and park, and also allowing owners to recognize the value of their lots that are now mapped as the park. So here's an aerial that's now quickly becoming outdated. Just putting that phasing plan into the context of the overall Hudson Yards development, and you can see the park, which phase one's now open, runs just north of the eastern rail yards. It is the kind of terminus of the 7-line expansion, and it is directly to the east of the Javits Center. So currently, Section 9332 outlines floor area mechanisms for phase two of the park. So one, there could be no new development or expansions in the map boulevard and park. So there are operating businesses currently that are mapped as the park, and those can continue operating, but they're kind of frozen by the zoning. Owners of property are able to transfer the development rights from the mapped park parcels to specific receiving sites throughout the Special Hudson Yards District. And we've seen multiple people come in for that chair certification for the transfer of development rights. And then third, owners may seek a contribution in kind authorization, allowing property owners to build out portions or entire blocks of the boulevard and park in exchange for the District Improvement Fund bonus development rights. And in July of 2017, the City Planning Commission approved the first of these contribution in kind authorizations for Tishman Spire's property on Block 4. So the department is pleased that this contribution in kind authorization mechanism is being used as we want to see the expedited development of phase two of the Hudson Boulevard and Park. However, city planning has been approached by multiple parties, including City Hall, Hudson Yards Development Corporation, and private developers who have brought to our attention that there are certain limitations in the text that discourage private applicants from seeking this contribution in kind. So I will run through now the, these issues with the text as we've identified, and then also how we're proposing in the new proposed text to address those kind of one by one. So the most significant concern is regarding the sequencing of the contribution in kind requirements. So currently, before seeking the authorization, applicants must first acquire the lots in the boulevard and park, sell off the development rights, and clear and deed the site over to the city. That process can delay the authorization approvals, as it's often difficult to secure the funding to go out and acquire those lots without first obtaining that authorization from the commission. Okay, so the proposed text would allow owners to seek that contribution in kind authorization prior to fulfilling the previously stated conditions, such as clearing and deeding the site over to the city, as long as those conditions are accomplished either by the date of the authorization or in accordance with agreements or instruments entered into by the city. So the proposed text also requires kind of as a check that the entity responsible for the contribution in kind improvements actually have site control of the future park site prior to the issuance of the building permit for the bonus floor area on the receiving site. Additionally, the contribution in kind current zoning text required a construction schedule at the time of the authorization, but it's unclear as to how detailed the schedule must be, and it got brought to our attention that the term construction schedule in real estate world is not equivalent to what it might be in zoning world, so the text just clarified so that we don't need a full construction schedule, but an outline of that schedule, including major milestones such as 50% complete and then substantially complete. Additionally, currently only owners of the granting and receiving site can apply for the contribution in kind. But as we just discussed in the issue number 1, it's often, and now an applicant will be able to seek that authorization prior to having site control of the park site. So this text would allow both owners and contract vendees to apply for the transfer of floor area. The current zoning also doesn't explicitly outline how that contribution in kind bonus should be calculated. The text would clarify that the bonus should be the reasonable cost of the contribution in kind or the cost of the acquisition and construction of the park divided by the current price of the DIB at the time of the authorization. This is the same calculation that was done for the Tishman Spire authorization, and everyone agreed to that as being the reasonable interpretation of the text, and this is just formalizing that. And finally, the current text is unclear regarding which types of legal documents are required for both of the share certification and the authorization in this section. And so the proposed text just now clearly outlines that a transfer agreement and a notice of restrictions is required for the floor area transfer, and an RD is required for the contribution in kind authorization. So to conclude, this text amendment does not substantially change the process through which the boulevard and park may be developed, but intends to further facilitate this process so that the private developers may take advantage of the contribution in kind mechanism, and the city and the community may see an expedited development of the Hudson Boulevard and Park. Thank you.
I'd note that this is perhaps the good example of the opposite of the PCE, where we have some relatively recent zoning text. We had an experience with an applicant taking advantage of it and thought that it made sense right away to take the lessons into consideration so that we might accelerate the development of the park by providing clarity. Questions? Yes, Commissioner Deleuze.
Thanks for walking us through. I'm just wondering, and I can't remember when this came before us earlier for the other property, whether the reasonable cost was determined using an independent party.
Yes, there were 2 independent parties doing the analysis of the cost, and those were compared, and then that was provided as part of the authorization.
Okay. Would it make sense to make that clear?
Perhaps, I'm not sure if that's something we discussed, but I'll kind of go back to the group and bring that up.
Thanks.
Other questions? Commissioner Levin.
Well, just for information, you mentioned you've been approached by a number of folks interested in seeing this happen. Do you have any, are you seeing interest in all 3 of the undeveloped blocks? Are people talking about parks on all of block 4, 5, and 6? Might it really happen?
Yes, we're hoping. So there's certainly ongoing active conversations on Block 4 that we're hoping we'll see as soon, if this text is approved, them quickly coming in for the authorization. And then there has been conversations on Block 6, but those have kind of been put on pause. But we're hoping, HYDC has made it clear that after this text, if this text is approved, then they would kind of want to reopen those conversations. Block 5, the eastern portion is already built out, and the lots on the western portion of the boulevard and park are still under kind of disparate private ownership. So those conversations aren't actively happening now, but perhaps down the road if there's some zoning lot consolidation there.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Okay, this application gets referred out to both the community board and the borough president for 45 days.
Item number 7 on the agenda, page 199, is a non-ULIP referral for waterfront authorizations in Brooklyn Community District 6. Amrita Mahesh of the Brooklyn office is here to present.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is an application requesting zoning authorizations to modify waterfront public access area requirements. If approved, these actions would facilitate the development of an approximately 638,000 square foot commercial building and a 1.83 acre waterfront public access area. Related actions include a waterfront chairperson certification and a special permit from the Board of Standards and Appeals to reduce the accessory parking requirement. The project site is located along the waterfront in the Red Hook neighborhood of Community District 6 in Brooklyn. The project area is located in an M31 zoning district, which allows for a maximum FAR of 2.0 and permits industrial and commercial uses in addition to limited retail uses. The surrounding area is characterized by a mix of commercial and industrial buildings, 2 to 3 story mixed use and residential buildings, vacant lots used for vehicular storage, and community facilities. The Southwest Brooklyn IBZ runs along most of the waterfront in Red Hook, but does not include the project area. The project site is located within the 100-year flood zone with a base flood elevation of 13 feet. The project site is the location of the former Revere Sugar Factory, which ceased operations in 1985 and was demolished in 2007. The site is currently vacant. The landward portion is a rectangular-shaped peninsular lot, bounded by Beard Street to the northeast and the Erie Basin to the east, south, and west. To the west of the project site are the Beard Street warehouses, which contain commercial and industrial uses. Further west is an MX district, which was the result of the 2002 Red Hook stores rezoning, which facilitated the establishment of a Fairway grocery store with residential units above in a 5-story warehouse building. The Erie Basin breakwater to the south contains warehouse and storage facilities and a barge port that generates commercial marine traffic. To the southeast is an IKEA home furnishing store, which was the subject of several actions approved by the CPC in 2002 that permitted a large-scale retail establishment in an M11 district and waived certain waterfront area bulk and design regulations. The IKEA site includes a waterfront esplanade that extends along the site's entire waterfront that would connect to the proposed development's waterfront public access area. Nearby access to public transportation includes bus service with the B61 and B57 bus routes, making stops a block away from the project area, and ferry access to Manhattan at the IKEA dock and the Red Hook dock at Van Brunt Street. The nearest subway station is the Smith and 9th Street station on the F and G lines, slightly over 1 mile from the project area. The proposed development would be a building consisting of 2 above-grade parallel structures divided by a visual corridor that is required per waterfront zoning at the prolongation of Richard Street. The project area's shoreline would be bounded by a shore public walkway located along the east, south, and west edges of the site. The proposed building would be a 5-story building with approximately 614,000 square feet of office use and 24,000 square feet of retail use. The first story would include retail uses and office lobby space, while the 2nd through 5th stories would be occupied with office uses. The 2 parallel structures would be connected below grade by an accessory parking facility, which was the subject of a special permit from the BSA to reduce the accessory parking requirement for the proposed use group 6B office use. The waterfront public access area consists of an approximately 79,000 square foot shore public walkway outlined here in green, which has been designed to allow the public to connect with the adjacent waterfront in different ways, offering pedestrians varying and unique experiences along each shoreline edge. In addition, there are a number of spaces proposed within the building structures that are intended to help activate the long stretches of waterfront esplanade. Retail uses shown here in red are proposed along Beard Street and at locations along the shore public walkway and visual corridor. In orange are locations for office amenity spaces. In purple are gallery spaces. The applicant intends to use the gallery spaces to display art, chiefly from the local art community of Red Hook. Given the peninsular-like shape of the lot, which results in a long shoreline, approximately 1,900 feet, the applicant has designed 4 distinct areas of publicly accessible space: the eco-recreational edge, the basin panorama, the urban maritime edge, and the visual corridor. The following diagrams and renderings show the proposed design and edge conditions along these areas. The eco-recreational edge is located along the southeastern border of the project area. This length has been designed to facilitate interaction with the water's edge in different ways. The primary circulation path is located closer to the building, with a secondary path that splits from the primary path and leads down to the water's edge. Between these 2 paths are landscaped areas and a variety of seating options, including timber seating and stone seat walls. Portions of the bulkhead along this edge are cut back to create a pathway that begins near Beard Street and leads to a get-down, providing direct access to the Erie Basin. This get-down is intended to function as a kayak launch in the future, where the public would be able to enter the Erie Basin directly for recreational purposes once an operator is identified. The basin panorama is located along the southwest edge of the project area. From the end of the eco-recreational edge, the main pedestrian pathway would be a timber boardwalk, which continues along the edge of the waterfront, turning towards the northwest. Granite seat walls are located behind a sunken planter with ground cover, shrubs, and trees. The main pedestrian pathway connects to a stone staircase at the center of the basin panorama, which allows for circulation between the basin panorama and the visual corridor. At the southeast corner of the site, the bulkhead would be cut back to allow water to flow beneath the main pedestrian path, which is an elevated boardwalk at this location. Further west of the central stairs is a sloping lawn that would provide expansive views of the Erie Basin. Granite seat walls are located at the base of the lawn along the primary circulation path. At the southwest corner is a timber amphitheater that slopes up towards the waterfront, with seating facing in towards the basin panorama. Continuing along the waterfront, the urban maritime edge is located along the northwestern edge of the project area. The design is inspired by the working waterfront across the inlet, which contains docks for the New York water taxi and other marine vessels along the Civil War-era Beard Street warehouses. This edge offers a series of views across the inlet. The primary path shifts at several locations towards and away from the inlet to create a variety of experiences. The bulkhead has been cut back in 3 locations to create riprap conditions that allow water to flow into the site and beneath the boardwalk. These features also increase the size of the intertidal zone, which facilitates additional aquatic habitat with the sloped riprap adjacent to the boardwalk edge. At 2 locations along the pedestrian path, overlook points that include timber benches extend out towards the waterfront, providing seating and views across the inlet. Closer to the building are 3 areas with movable seating and chairs for public use interspersed with trees. In various locations shown here in red, additional public access areas, defined as public access areas, PAA, are located directly between the building structures and the shore public walkway. These areas, totaling approximately 1.67 acres, would increase the volume of publicly accessible open space on site, as they would be publicly accessible for the same hours as the shore public walkway. Areas designated as PAA include the visual corridor itself, as well as space underneath the building cantilevers and overhangs adjacent to the shore public walkway, or along the visual corridor that provides access to retail, lobby, gallery, and amenity spaces. The visual corridor extends from the terminus of Reade Street to the basin panorama edge of the shore public walkway. The applicant anticipates this area to be an active central open space between the 2 building portions for both public and tenant use. The Beard Street entrance would include 2 pedestrian paths and cobblestone ramps for short-term vehicular access, and a central staircase lined with ornamental trees leading up to the first set of building lobby entrances. The shared pedestrian and vehicular drive aisles, known as woo-nerves, extend between the drop-off and turnaround points adjacent to the 2 sets of building lobby entrances. The central area between these 2 shared aisles contains a variety of spaces with benches, movable seating and tables, planters, sculptural elements, a retail kiosk, and a dog run. This is an image of the visual corridor as seen from Beard Street. The applicant is seeking zoning authorizations to facilitate the site-specific programming of publicly accessible areas to ensure a distinctive experience along the different shoreline edges, as well as to overcome site planning constraints, which include a higher base plane to accommodate flood-resilient construction, the provision of below-grade required accessory parking, and the peninsular-like shape of the lot that requires an unusually long shore public walkway. The applicant proposes to provide waterfront public access areas in excess of the square footage requirements for such areas. However, certain portions of the waterfront public access area will be less than the required dimensions. The applicant is seeking to reduce the depth of waterfront yards and shore public walkway to less than the required 40 feet in select locations. The applicant is proposing a depth reduction of up to 8 feet 6 inches, which results in, at minimum, a reduced shore public walkway width of 31 feet 6 inches to enable strategies such as cutting back of the bulkhead to allow water to flow into the site and facilitate more direct interaction with the water, as well as to support future waterfront recreational activity. The applicant is proposing to raise the height of portions of the visual corridor above the minimum lowest level required per zoning by approximately 5 feet to help lessen the effects of constraints associated with flood protection requirements. While the visual corridor would still commence at the street level of approximately 6 feet at Beard Street, it would rise in height at a faster rate than permitted as it approaches the shoreline to achieve a level of 14 feet earlier. The applicant believes a higher visual corridor facilitates better visual and physical connectivity with adjacent building frontages, as pedestrian access to the building is provided from the same level as the visual corridor. The applicant is requesting to waive out of providing upland connections, which are required at maximum intervals of 600 feet along the shore public walkway. Due to the project area's high length-to-width ratio and peninsular-like shape, the complying upland connections shown here in the red hatched area would link to the visual corridor and the shore public walkway, but would not connect directly to the street or provide a quicker access to the street than with the direct line of travel along the shore public walkway itself. Furthermore, complying with upland connections would bisect each of the two building portions, reducing building footprints and impacting floor plate efficiencies. The applicant is seeking a reduction of the planting requirement from 50% to approximately 24.6% to support the design goal of bringing pedestrians closer to the water. As a result of the secondary pathway along the eco-recreational edge that slopes to a lower elevation and the retaining wall structure that is needed to negotiate this grade change, much of the area is unable to be fully planted. Furthermore, while the riprap conditions would be planted with shrubs and trees, these areas do not count towards the planting requirement for the purposes of zoning. The applicant is proposing to modify the requirement that within 5 feet of the edge of any planted area, the grade level should be no more than 18 inches higher or lower than the adjoining path to permit up to 5 feet 3 inches above the adjoining path in order to negotiate the grade changes between the 14-foot design flood elevation and lower pathway areas. The applicant is also seeking relief from the requirement that any retaining walls do not exceed 60% of the planter parameter and not exceed 18 inches in height. The applicant is proposing terraced planters that consist entirely of retaining walls with varying heights up to 5 feet 3 inches. The applicant is seeking to reduce the minimum lawn depth requirement from 2 feet 6 inches to 2 feet due to the presence of the below grade required accessory parking structure. In this zone, the design provides a 2-foot minimum planting depth for all lawn areas, and once the planter slopes up, compliant soil volume for the majority of the lawn is achieved. As well, the applicant is seeking relief from the requirement that lawns have a grade level within 6 inches of the adjacent grade for at least 60% of the perimeter, and no dimension less than 18 inches. Approximately 55% of the lawn perimeter meets the grade requirement, and some dimensions are less than 18 inches, which allows for a sloped lawn with a more opportunity for an unobstructed view of the Erie Basin. The applicant is seeking to reduce the minimum dimensions for openings of single tree pits from 30 square feet to, at minimum, 27 square feet to allow for larger cobblestone surfaces in the surrounding area for movable tables and seating. The applicant is seeking relief to provide screening buffers only in specific areas between the shore public walkway and non-publicly accessible areas. This relief would allow for direct access points from the shore public walkway to the retail, amenity, and gallery spaces that are intended to activate the esplanade. The applicant is also proposing to reduce the 10-foot minimum required width due to the narrow widths of portions of the shore public walkway and to maximize accessible space for public use. The minimum width proposed within the shore public walkway is reduced to 1 foot 4 inches, but would be an aggregate of 4 feet, including the adjacent screening in the private space, which does not count towards the requirement. The applicant is requesting to waive the provision that no shade trees be planted within 15 feet of the center line of a visual corridor. This would facilitate the planting of trees in the central area of the visual corridor, which is intended to be an active open space with shaded seating and amenities. The applicant is requesting to waive requirements that fences have a maximum height of 36 inches and be at least 70% open. A fence is proposed surrounding the dog run feature that would have a height of 48 inches and be 62.5% open to provide greater visual and physical separation between this kind of feature and the rest of the visual corridor. The applicant is proposing to place a total of 4 bollards in the circulation path near the entrance of the Waterfront public access area in order to prevent unauthorized vehicles from driving into the shore public walkway. Additionally, the proposed bollards exceed the 30-inch maximum height requirement by 6 inches because this height more closely aligns with the height of the adjacent handrails along the ramps, maintaining a consistent material, height, and design language. The applicant is requesting to modify the requirement for the lowest level of the shore public walkway from the elevation of the adjoining lot or sidewalk to the mean high water level in order to permit the get-down feature along the eco-recreational edge, which allows for access to the Erie Basin. The applicant is seeking to modify the requirement for the maximum interval between 2 circulation paths that are parallel to each other from 200 feet to approximately 212 feet. Along the eco-recreational edge, the secondary path slopes down to the water's edge and reconnects with the main path at a maximum interval of 212 feet of 5 inches. The applicant is proposing to provide guardrails along the water's edge to a maximum of 46 inches, which exceeds the permitted height of 42 inches. The main rail and panels comply with the height requirement, but the posts exceed the maximum permitted height by 4 inches to provide breaks in the paneling. The applicant seeks relief for the requirement that wood planks for the boardwalk or decking be a minimum thickness of 3 inches. The proposed decking would be 1 inch thick, but would sit atop a boardwalk substructure that is 4 inches thick, resulting in aggregate decking of 5 inches for additional support and structural soundness. The applicant believes that the requested waivers facilitate a superior design because of greater design flexibility to respond to the unique site conditions. In summary, the requested actions would facilitate the development of a 5-story, approximately 638,000 square foot commercial building and a 1.83 acre waterfront public access area. Thank you.
I think that the simplicity of the vision, but the complexity of the required actions shows the wisdom of the commission in allowing for authorizations. In putting together the requirements for the waterfront, I'm sure there was a recognition that the waterfront is varied, and so many of the challenges on this site come from the fact that when one thinks about the prototypical waterfront access, it's along one side of the property, not along all 3 sides. And so a thank you to our waterfront team and to our Brooklyn team who worked very hard with the applicant to focus on what was the intent, what would make for a good shore public walkway, and then to work to figure out what the authorizations that would be needed to get there. And I assume we'll learn a lot more through the public process. And with that, questions from the commission. Commissioner Irfan.
I promise not to go through this detail by detail. I just wanted to make an overarching comment, which is, first of all, thank you for a very clear presentation with a lot of detail. I just think that the view corridor, and it's very, very attractive, just as an overarching concern that I imagine they will be able to address, to make sure that, in fact, it feels like public space as opposed to part of an office park. I don't mean to denigrate the project, it's beautiful, but that it really feels public. And I don't know what is required, but certainly what I would hope to see is signage that makes it clear. There is a dog park, which I think is terrific, right in the middle. So again, making it clear that the entire space is available to the public seems critical for the success of this. And then I just have one point where I would just like further explanation. Perhaps you can even do it. The section on the bottom of the page where the waterfront is, where it goes down to 1.1 foot 4 inches for accessibility. How does that work exactly?
That was the screening buffer. That wasn't the width of the walkway
I'm sorry. Then I
itself.
completely misunderstood you. Okay. So there is always at least handicap length
That is correct.
access.
At minimum, it's 31 feet 6 inches. That's the narrowest portion of the Shore Public Walkway.
31 inches.
Yes, and the entire space has been designed to be accessible.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Deleuze.
Thank you for that detailed review of a project that I know has a lot of local interest. I'm wondering if it would be helpful if a section were included where we could see the difference in heights from the parking out to the various degrees of height. I think that would be helpful, and I'm sure the community would benefit from that as well. The other question I have is, do we have a precedent for waiving the upland connection requirement elsewhere?
I can check and follow up.
Okay, that'd be great. And then, given that this is obviously in a flood zone and that there's been review of an integrated flood protection plan for the same community, it'd be helpful to know how the two speak to one another.
Okay.
And then finally, given I guess 2 or 3 times you said that some of the modifications were really about future recreational uses, but then certainly the ground floor types of uses didn't speak to that potential recreational use. So I'm wondering if there's any intention of including community facility to help connect to those recreational uses in the waterfront.
One of the spaces along the eco-recreational edge is intended for the kayak operator. Once an operator is identified, there's a small space adjacent to the kayak launch that's intended for that.
Okay, and then if you already know what level of community input is reflected in this proposal, it'd be helpful to
The
know.
applicant has reached out to the community board periodically to give them an update on the status of the project.
Okay, and there are multiple local residents in Red Hook that are very active in the integrated flood protection plan that hopefully they've been in touch with as well.
We can follow up.
Great.
I would note that the parking waiver already went to the community board and received a recommendation from them.
Mr. Knuckles.
Well, just a question, because we don't see these kinds of projects obviously every day. But given the extensive and very detailed modifications being asked here, is there anything instructive in here in terms of the zoning code that we can take away from this to modify the zoning code?
I would ask Amrita.
Flexibility in design is something that we've heard from a lot of applicants coming in, even for waterfront certifications, asking for a little bit of room with either the planting requirement or off late because of the higher flood elevations. They are having to ramp up and back down quite a bit, which takes away from space that would otherwise be used for planting or for lawns. So taking a closer look at that is something that our waterfront division and urban design division are doing.
Yes, Amrita, I have a few questions, but I just wanted to compliment you on a very elegant presentation of what could have been deadly dull, but, but actually wasn't, because this is a very exciting project. On the visual corridor, can you explain how the temporary vehicular access will work, and to what extent, how will that be allowed? Who will be using it, and to what extent will it interfere with the sort of the public nature of the pedestrian space?
So the overall intent for this space is sort of a shared street type approach. So they have incorporated certain materialities and subtle moves in the treatment of the pavers to imply which zones are meant for pedestrians and which zones are designated for vehicular access only. And the idea is that it would be just to the drop-off and turnaround points that you are able to see right here with the sculptural elements adjacent to that. So it is intended to be a safe space that also feels like a shared street where you have both cars and pedestrians.
Well, but will anyone coming to these buildings by vehicle be allowed to access
That is correct. They would be able to just drop off pedestrians, and then the access to the garage itself would be from the two curb cuts that are on Beard Street, not from the visual corridor. There are two other curb cuts that enter the parking structure.
So that leads then to next question is the hours that all of this open space will be publicly available?
That is correct. It's the same hours as the Shore Public Walkway, which would be until business closing I can follow up about the exact time, but it's until business closing or later.
Okay, and are those hours that are specified in the zoning? It's a while since we did this.
Yes, it would be in the restrictive declaration as well.
Okay, and they'll be following rules that are already laid out in the zoning
That is
for
correct.
the degree of the hours of accessibility?
That is correct.
Okay. And then just finally, returning to Commissioner Deluz's question about the precedents for waiving upland connections, I think I'd also be interested in knowing whether there are other situations in which we've managed to have passageways through these long, skinny buildings.
I can follow up regarding that.
I mean, are there examples against it and examples for it?
Okay.
Because it does seem that these are going to be very long runs, and it might be an attractive feature, although I realize hard for the developer, but an attractive feature to be able to cut through the building to get from one side to the other without having to go all the way around.
We can follow up regarding that.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Serlo.
So I just want to ask a question just about the terminology shared street. Because, I mean, obviously the word shared street, it seems simple enough that there are cars and pedestrians, but I'm wondering if the city is moving more formally through a type of use of the street that is called a shared street, almost with capital letters. And I'm just wondering if that's what's envisioned, like a formal shared street that the city would be proposing, or is it just the use will be?
The use will be shared. It's the latter. The use will be by both vehicles and pedestrians, and it's intended to be sort of courtyard type space that also has clear demarcations for the driveways.
Okay, so I guess my follow-up question to that is, and I'm only relating this to how the city is pursuing this type of a street, and whether or not the sort of private sector is going to have to deal with the kinds of issues that the city is dealing with, but that has to do with public safety. And the city is looking aggressively at trying to create the safest environment for pedestrians on a shared street. And I just wonder if there are public safety requirements that will be imposed on this design, similar to what the city is pursuing in terms of using the public streets for a similar purpose, where you have both vehicular access and pedestrian access.
Because this is meant for only short-term vehicular access, and unlike a shared street in its true sense where there's constant movement of vehicles, this is only for drop-offs. So it doesn't necessarily have the same level of security, but it is intended to be safe enough because of the treatment of materials and slight changes in grade that are a visual cue for pedestrians and vehicles.
If I might elaborate, this is not intended to be a public street. When we've been talking in the past about shared streets, it's an existing street which has been open to vehicular traffic and is now proposed to be shared. This is a drop-off area on private property, which will be used for the cars dropping off, but also for the pedestrians. As someone who likes to learn new words, this concept is actually called WOONERF, W-O-O-N-E-R-F, this planning concept of a space that is largely pedestrian but is used for occasional vehicular movements as well.
Sorry, along this WOONERF line, we're calling it a drop-off, but I'm actually much more concerned about the pickup because as of now, Red Hook is challenged with transportation that serves the entire city. And I suspect if this is as dynamic an office building as is presented to us, there will be some rush hour pickup traffic. And if the nature of it is yellow taxis, which I think Red Hook would be shocked about, but more likely Ubers, that's going to be a complicated space, particularly during rush hour pickup. And I would want to see, when this comes back, some real specificity about how many cars, basically what the reservoir for that space would be at its maximum potential, given that it's several 100,000 square feet of office space for each building.
We can request the applicant to respond to that.
Yes, Commissioner Ortiz.
I had another question, but that prompted me to think about what some cities are doing, which is creating locations where Uber pickup can occur. So perhaps, we discourage pickups from going on the shared street and create a location at the end so that they don't have to go out on the pier. That might make sense, because I do see the potential for conflict here, and to get back to sort of the thing that I wanted to mention was we haven't talked about cyclists at all. And given the really long, it's very popular activity in this area. I can imagine a lot of cyclists going out there, and I would like to understand how we perceive their usage, because there will be even more additional conflict with that, and the narrow widths that are proposed along the public walkways might create some challenges too. Would they anticipate restrictions on cyclists on the boardwalk? I know some places have done that, although it's really quite long to get out there. So if you've got a bike, and where do you lock it up? All of those things I think need to be taken into consideration.
Other questions? As Commissioner Delou said, the community has been involved in this, and we're likely to get lots of interesting feedback through the public review process. And if no other questions, then we'll refer this to the community board for 45 days.
Thank you.
Item number 8 on the agenda, page 266, is a non-ULURP post referral for a fresh authorization in Brooklyn Community District 8. Kevin Kraft is here to present.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is an application returning for post referral by Happy Living Development for an authorization to modify the maximum building height from 85 feet to 99 feet in a mixed-use commercial residential building containing a fresh food store at 805 Washington Avenue in Prospect Heights, Community District 8, Brooklyn. The proposed action would facilitate the development of a 9-story, approximately 53,000 square foot mixed-use development, including a 6,300 square foot fresh food store on the ground floor and 47,000 square feet of residential space for 37 units. There is also a related chairperson certification to certify that the proposed food store use would be a fresh food store. The proposed project area is bounded by Eastern Parkway to the south, Classen Avenue to the east, Lincoln Place to the north, and Washington Avenue to the west. The surrounding area is predominantly residential, comprised of multifamily walk-up and elevator buildings ranging between 3 to 15 stories. Taller buildings are generally located south of Lincoln Place along Eastern Parkway. The project area is well served by public transit. The 2, 3, and 4 subway lines stop at the Brooklyn Museum Station, which is 1 block south of the project site. And additionally, there are several bus routes, including the B45 and B48, which operate nearby. The area is mapped within an R7A zoning district. When mapped with a qualifying ground floor, R7A permits a maximum base height of 75 feet with a maximum building height of 85 feet. A C14 commercial overlay is mapped along the project site and the majority of Washington Avenue to a depth of 100 feet. And the area was mapped as part of the food retail expansion to support health area, known as Fresh, in 2008. The project area includes 2 tax lots, lots 1 and 6, that comprise one approximately 48,000 square foot zoning lot Lot 6, outlined in red, is the proposed fresh project site. It's located on the corner of Washington Avenue, considered a wide street, and Lincoln Place, considered a narrow street. The site was previously improved with a single-story retail building, which included a 5,400 square foot supermarket. The one-story retail building was vacated and demolished in 2017. Lot 1, fronting on Eastern Parkway, is currently comprised with a 6-story, 67-foot tall residential building, and the applicants are purchasing development rights from Lot 1 and would be transferring them to the project site on Lot 6. So here are some views looking from Washington Avenue towards the proposed project site. And then here's a view. The top right photo is actually directly across Washington Avenue. That's currently a residential building that's under construction, proposed to reach up to 150 feet. The bottom left-hand corner photo is Lot 6, which is the development site. Lot 1, which is the proposed site they'd be transferring development rights from. The applicants are requesting an authorization pursuant to zoning resolution section 6322 to exceed the R7A maximum permitted building height of 85 feet by 14 feet. For buildings containing a fresh food store, the commission may authorize a 15-foot height increase in the maximum allowable building height, provided that the commission finds 3 findings. That the modification is necessary to accommodate a first-story fresh food store, that the proposed modifications would not adversely affect the essential scale and character of the adjacent buildings and any historic resources, and that the proposed modifications will not unduly obstruct access to light and air of adjacent properties. The proposed fresh food store would be located on the ground floor with floor-to-ceiling heights of 14 feet, which would contribute to a superior retail space. The fresh food store, as part of the chairperson certification, would generate a floor area bonus of approximately 6,300 square feet, which would be accommodated on the 8th and 9th stories, which would add 1.5 stories to the development. And in response to a question raised by the commission at referral regarding the location of store signage and the incorporation of HPD's retail guidelines, the applicants expressed that the building as currently designed meets several of HPD's guidelines, including ground floor ceiling heights, entry at grade, street trees, transparency, and separated entrances by use. And they're also open to considering the guidelines further in regards to future signage. According to the applicants, this authorization is necessary to provide a fresh food store on the ground floor, addressing the need for a full-service supermarket in the neighborhood, and to accommodate the additional floor area generated from the fresh bonus, and to provide additional housing. So here is a neighborhood diagram showing the proposed development site with the adjacent buildings on the block. Directly to the south, adjacent to the project site, is also a residential building that's currently under construction, proposed to reach up to 65 feet. That's currently under construction, and at 67 feet, you can see the development site they'd be transferring development rights from. Also, the blue line represents the maximum building height for an R7A building with a qualifying ground floor. Outlined in red is where the additional height would be located. This photo is showing from south from Lincoln Place. You can see across Washington Avenue, which again is a wide street, the proposed residential building that's reaching 150 feet, as well as another residential building that reaches a height of 55 feet. I also want to point out that the building sets back 27 feet and 15 feet on Lincoln Place, as well as 10 feet on Washington Avenue. This rendering, you can actually see the 27-foot setback would occur where a 30-foot outer court would be to the adjacent building. The building also steps down to the context of the surrounding buildings. And as you get closer to Washington Avenue, the building sets back 15 feet. On December 27th, Community Board 8 submitted a letter to deny support for the application, specifying that the zoning and financial incentives were not necessary to attract a grocery store at this location, and that this portion of Community District 8 is not underserved by grocery stores. In the letter, the Community Board did specify they'd be willing to entertain support of the application if the new supermarket operated in a way that would serve a range of incomes. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Questions from the commission? Commissioner Efron.
I have 2 questions. One that came up because of your presentation. The 150-foot building, was that through a BSA approval or?
That's as of right. That's actually an
That was as of
R8X
right.
district.
That was R8X, not R7.
Correct.
Okay. And then my second question was really just how we approach this. Is in fact the fresh food certification a but for the fresh food certification, this wouldn't exist, in which case I would like a little bit of a history of the grocery store that was there,
Okay.
its negotiation to buy the condominium and its reentry. Was this transaction contemplated as part of a fresh food certification, or were they going to move in under any circumstances, or do we have any language that sets up a chain so that we can understand the history?
Yeah, we're happy to follow up with the applicants as far as how the previous operators and the new operators got to this point. So we can follow up with them for a formal response.
Have we any other history with other fresh food certifications where an applicant actually had to prove, but for the fresh food certification, there wouldn't be one if there was one existing before the redevelopment?
Not that I'm aware of.
Other questions, comments? Commissioner Delos.
Well, I just wanted to follow up on the second half of what you said, the community board outline related to their vote, which was that in the event that the developer is willing to ensure price points that are affordable to a range of incomes, I'm just wondering how that came up in the conversation with the community board and how it was discussed, and whether or not we know that if the developer's open to that.
The developers expressed that they have heard the community board's request. The community board 8 also put that into a letter of recommendation on a previous fresh food store that was in community board 8. So I think this is something that they're doing constantly through any fresh project that's happening in the district. But we can follow up with the applicants as far as a formal response if they plan on addressing the affordability to various incomes. But I think it's in their best interest if the market can support that to be able to provide one.
You know, the history of this site, kind of poses the question to us about whether the whole fresh program and the bonus allowed for fresh, in fact, creates an incentive for the removal of existing food stores. To what extent did the bonus potential here motivate this transaction? I don't know that we'll ever know the answer to that, but that's essentially what we're confronted with. But I wonder also what role the transferred development rights from the adjacent building play here. Do they really need the extra height to accommodate the grocery store? Or do they need it to be able to pack in the development rights that they're acquiring from next door? They argue in their findings, though they assert in their findings, which they have to assert, that it's needed for the fresh store, but then they conclude by saying that it's really needed to create a financially viable project. Well, that's irrelevant to this. To the findings before us. So I'm a little on the fence about what's really going on here and whether this really is appropriate for a fresh authorization.
The previous supermarket that did exist on that site was a smaller, they are actually enlarging on the site, so there is a little bit of a benefit of that. In regards to the fresh program, this is something that it's to incentivize fresh food stores in areas that were identified as underserved. And I think this is something where they're actually retaining, because of the fresh incentives, they're actually retaining a grocery store at this site. And as far as the site itself, it was a one-story retail building. They're now able to provide additional housing, although it's more condos, it's still more housing than was previously at the site. As far as the transferring of development rights, by doing that, it gives them a little more flexibility in the building's articulation to fit within the context of the surrounding neighborhood. It also ensures that the site that they're transferring the development rights from will remain a 6-story, 67-foot tall residential building. So there's a little bit of give and take as far as the transfer of development rights to the site.
Okay. Good answer. Thank you.
I actually appreciate that answer because I had some of the same concerns, but thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Delos.
I may have had a misunderstanding of the minimum size of a supermarket under the Fresh program, but for some reason I had 7,500 square feet in my mind as the minimum size. Is that wrong?
It's 6,000.
It's 6,000.
6,000 square feet.
Okay,
We'll see it on the next item.
okay.
Any other questions or comments? We'll obviously come back to the commission with answers to the questions, and then we'll schedule this for a vote. Thank you.
Item number 9 on the agenda, page 295, is a pre-hearing review for a special permit in Manhattan Community District 2. Sylvia Lee of the Manhattan office is here to present.
Good afternoon. This is a private application for a landmark preservation special permit returning as a pre-hearing item to allow use group 6 retail use on portions of the ground floor and the cellar of an existing 6-story building located at 31 Bond Street in an M15B zoning district within the NoHo Historic District Extension, Manhattan Community District 2. The commission may recall that the application was certified in December 2017. In your briefing packages are recommendations from CB2 and Manhattan Borough President. CB2 recommended denial with conditions. The Borough President recommended approval with conditions. I'll do a quick overview of the project and discuss the recommendations. The building was built around 1888 and represents one of the earliest examples of store and loft typology in NoHo. The building historically housed a variety of uses, but has been vacant since December 2013. The project site is located within an M15B district, which permits light industrial and commercial uses as a right up to 5 FAR. Use group 6 retail use is not permitted as a right below the level of second story. The site is located on Bond Street, again, mid-block between Lafayette and Bowery. Along Bond Street, residential conversions and new residential buildings have been permitted via CPC special permits or BSA variances over the years. This stretch of Bond Street also has some existing commercial retail uses, as well as eating and drinking establishments towards Bowery. The approximately 3,000 square foot zoning lot is about 25 feet wide by about 124 feet deep. The rear of the site abuts Jones Alley, an unmapped private street that connects Lafayette and Bleecker Street. The applicant proposes to use 3,849 gross square feet of floor area on portions of the ground floor and the cellars for use group 6 commercial retail use, including 2,021 zoning square feet on the ground floor and additional retail uses in the cellar and sub-cellar level. While the building was granted a BSA variance for residential conversion in 2015, currently the applicant intends to abandon the BSA variance and reoccupy the upper floors with conforming offices. In connection with the proposed use modification, the building will undergo a comprehensive renovation and historic preservation process. The application was certified on December 11, 2017. At its full board meeting on December 21st, 2017, Manhattan Community Board 2 adopted a resolution recommending denial of the application unless the following conditions are met. First, the applicant formally communicates with the BSA to abandon the variance in its entirety. Second, the applicant is correct that there was never a loft lock case in this building and the GLWQA units were disposed of properly. Third, the CPC stipulates no eating and drinking establishments in the special permit. And fourth, the applicant makes every effort to find a maker retail tenant as described in the application. On January 24th, 2018, the Manhattan Borough President issued recommendation to approve the application, provided that the applicant keeps their commitment to abandon the variance and secures an artisanal retail use on the ground floor. That's it for the presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Commissioner Levin.
Well, I just hope at the hearing that the applicant can spell out to us a little bit more what their vision is for the retail space and whether what kind of assurances they can give us that they will be able to turn up the kind of tenant that they have described to the community board and the borough president. And I want to compliment the community board for coming up with a new zoning term for us, which is a high footfall operator.
Yeah, but thank you.
Yeah, so, I think it goes without saying that I think we'd be interested in hearing the applicant's response to the conditions in the community board's letter.
The applicant will be prepared to speak to that and spell out the commitment they made to the borough president as well as the community board. My understanding is the applicant does not intend to use the ground floor space for a restaurant or any kind of eating and drinking establishment.
Good. Commissioner Ortiz.
In the borough president's comments, they make the point that, in a previous application at 40 Worcester Street, it didn't prevent the tenant, for the owner, from selling the property, and now it's being listed. And so all of those assurances are thrown out the window. So I do think I agree with you. We need something in writing.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, this will go to a public hearing on Wednesday.
Item number 10 on the agenda, page 326, a pre-hearing item for special permit in Manhattan Community District 2. Sylvia Lee, our frequent flyer today, is here to present.
The commission will recall that this is a private application seeking a special permit pursuant to Manhattan Core parking regulations, returning as a pre-hearing item to allow a 187-space attended public parking garage within an as-of-right mixed-use building located at 21 East 12th Street within C17, C61 districts, Manhattan Community District 2. The rendering shows the view of the project from the corner of East 12th Street and University Place looking northwest. The project is in construction. The application was certified on October 30th, 2017. Both CB2 and Manhattan Borough President recommended disapproval of the application. The commission will recall that the project site is located at the corner of East 12th Street and University Place in the neighborhood east of Greenwich Village and south of Union Square. The area is characterized by buildings of varied scale and uses, including residential, commercial, and institutional uses. University Place is lined with some mid to high-rise apartment buildings, ranging from 10 to 15 stories. In recent years, the neighborhood has seen some residential growth and loss of parking spaces due to new construction, enlargement, and conversions, including residential conversions of former parking garages. There are 2 such conversions on this subject block. The site is largely within the C17 district, which extends along University Place from East 8th Street to north of East 13th Street, and permits residential use up to 6.02 FAR, commercial up to 2 FAR, and community facility up to 6.5 FAR. The project site was previously improved with a 4-story commercial building that contained the Bullmore lanes on the 2 upper floors and retail on the ground floor, and a 200-space DCA licensed parking garage on the ground and 2nd floors. The building was demolished in 2014 in anticipation of the new mixed-use development. The applicant is currently constructing a 21-story, 6.42 FAR mixed-use building with 53 market rate units, just short of 13,000 square feet of retail use and a small amount of community facility use on the development site. As part of the project, the applicant also proposes to include an attended public parking garage of 187 spaces beyond the 13 as-of-right spaces permitted in the largely as-of-right development. The proposed parking garage would essentially replace the parking spaces in the garage that had previously occupied the site and serve the residents of the building as well as the surrounding neighborhood. The proposed garage would include about 25,000 square feet of parking surface area on the subcellar and cellar levels. The parking spaces would be accessed from East 12th Street by a 2-way vehicular ramp located approximately 83 feet west of University Place. The shaded blue areas, the access ramp leading to the cellar level of the garage. Shown here are the cellar and subcellar levels of the parking garage. The proposed garage will include 134 spaces, surface parking spaces, and 53 additional spaces on trays. Here's a rendering of the building base with the proposed parking garage entrance on the far left. The applicant undertook the residential growth parking analyses as required by the zoning regulations. As documented by the applicant, the area within 1/3 mile radius of the project site has experienced significant residential growth and loss of parking spaces since 2006, which has generated an unmet parking demand. The required analyses found that the proposed 187 spaces are reasonable and not excessive in relation to the recent trends within close proximity to the project site. Specifically, the analysis found that the ratio of change in residential parking spaces to change in residential units with the proposed action in the study area would be minus 64%, well below the residential growth parking ratio maximum 20%. At its full board meeting on December 21st, 2017, Manhattan Community Board 2 adopted a resolution recommending denial of the application. CB2 also recommends that should the City Planning Commission consider adding any additional spaces beyond the as-of-right number of spaces, the maximum number of spaces should not exceed 53, which is the number of the dwelling units in the building. And and require that these units be for residential customers only or for a combination of residential customers and car share spaces, as well as at least 38 permanent bike stations for monthly rental. On January 24th, 2018, the Manhattan Borough President issued recommendation to disapprove the application, as the Manhattan Borough President does not believe there is a parking demand in this part of Manhattan Core. In sum, the applicant seeks approval of a special permit pursuant to Manhattan Core parking regulations to replace a previously existing public parking garage within an otherwise as-of-right mixed-use development. Here are findings of the special permit. This is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the commission? Commissioner Deleuze.
Can you remind me how long the old parking garage, like how long has the parking not existed at this point?
The building was demolished in 2014, so.
And are there any traffic studies? I'm trying to go to the part about, on the special permit findings about the traffic.
Oh, okay.
I'm wondering if there are traffic studies at the time when that garage existed versus now when there is no garage that could perhaps help inform number 3 around traffic congestion?
There is an environmental analysis done for the proposed action. I can look into it and provide some additional information.
It just so happens that we have the exact same use for nearly the same number of spaces that existed at the spot, so.
Yeah.
I think we should also ask the applicant to be prepared to address it at the public hearing.
Yeah.
This version,
Commissioner Sula.
free thinking on this. The proposal has one entrance and exit on 12th versus the former garage had on University and on 12th. So there was a lot going on in and out on both sides. So this would limit the access to just 12th.
Right, and also given that there's garage plan review associated with the parking special permit, we believe that the new parking garage will provide enough reservoir spaces to reduce the amount of queuing.
Yeah, that was, I'm sorry.
I don't know if there's any more you want to flesh out for us about criteria number 5, which is the character of the existing streetscape, because I would say that this neighborhood is characterized by pedestrian Union Square subway access, and I don't know how far the department cares or has stretched the question of character when it comes to this, but it just strikes me that this is a really unusual circumstance. I mean, the building that was removed, the Bullmore building, was somewhat out of character with the building, with the street, and this one, by adding back in the garage, in my opinion, would not make it fit more into character. It would actually be atypical for a dense neighborhood, more like a city like Chicago than New York, in my opinion, right next to public transportation of this nature, Union Square, to have such a large parking lot, even one-for-one parking, and then twice as much as that for the tenants in the building.
So in considering the neighborhood character, in association with a parking special permit, the department usually reviews the kind of the relationship between the parking garage entrance and existing curb cuts and loading of parking entrances along the block on both sides of the street. So given that there was an existing parking garage here and there are existing curb cuts, we don't believe that the new proposed parking garage is overly disruptive in terms of neighborhood character from that perspective. In terms of the scale of the building, again, this is permitted by the zoning, existing zoning, and it's an as-of-right building typology.
Oh, I don't mean the building itself. I actually mean the number of parking spaces within it. That seems a different character than we're used to.
Yeah, it would seem to me that our city policy regarding these kinds of parking garages changed in 2013. And the fact that this one predated that policy should be largely irrelevant. We now have a zoning arrangement that basically prohibits parking garages unless you qualify for a special permit. And the lead-in, the general provisions that then lead to this special residential growth special permit say that this permit is only available for a facility that's serving the parking needs of a predominantly residential development. Well, this one is a predominantly residential development, but it's only got 53 units, and it just kind of doesn't make common sense that 187 spaces are justified for a development of that size. And I put it together with the fact, recognizing what a hub Union Square is, and the fact that we now have on our agenda today the tech hub, which is going to draw more vehicular traffic, more commercial traffic to the neighborhood. And I think we have to be realistic that this is potentially a largely transient commercial parking facility of the sort that the 2013 zoning sought to limit. So I hope the applicant can address some of those concerns on Wednesday.
Right. So the applicant team will speak to kind of the parking utilization rates in this neighborhood, both in the previously existing garage and as well as the current garages that are operating. And we'll respond to some of the concerns about whether there is a need for residential parking in the neighborhood.
Good. Thank you. Commissioner Cirillo.
And I guess I would just add a little bit on the other side, literally and figuratively on this issue, that we don't forget that we are a major destination to the region, if not beyond, and that not everyone comes to this city by public transportation, that we market this city for people to come every possible way they can. This neighborhood particularly has some of the finest restaurants, some of the greatest shopping, and amazing businesses that bring people not just by public transportation. And so I hope that balance gets achieved in the process, and we don't just, I realize we are confined by formula and findings, but that we are reasonable in recognizing how important this city is and how important the people who come, even not by public transportation, are to our economy, whether they're employees, whether they're business people, visitors, tourists, consumers. So that's just my addition to the dialogue.
And I would note, we consciously don't have sides of the table. We are going to continue this. Any other comments or questions?
I'm going to drive next to me.
Well, this should make for a lively public hearing on Wednesday.
I take the ferry in now. But I recognize the significance, importance, and the value of the people who come to the city expecting that the greatest city in the world is going to accommodate them in some way. And then, again, the problem with cars driving around is that there's no place to park, so we can get people off the road faster and easier if there's actually some place to go, as opposed to them coming in thinking there will be some place to go and then searching around. But that's a comedy act. You won't go
Thank you.
This also makes me very glad that I wasn't around at the time of the last parking discussion. I can only imagine.
I get all sides of this.
Okay, so this goes to public hearing on Wednesday.
Okay.
Thank you.
Item 11 on the agenda, page 378. It's a pre-hearing review for a UDAAP designation, disposition of city-owned property, and a special permit in Manhattan Community District 10. Joseph Hennekins of the Manhattan office is here to present.
Good afternoon. This is an application by the Department of Housing, Preservation, and Development, certified on October 16th and returning to the CPC for pre-hearing review. HPD is requesting an Urban Development Action Area Program, UDAAP designation, project approval, and disposition of city-owned property, along with a special permit applying a maximum FAR of 6.5 to a nonprofit institution with sleeping accommodations. Did I do something?
We seem to have lost the feed. I think they can hear us in the back. And the commission does have in front of them too, so you can, there we go.
Oh, there we go, okay. So the project is located at 302 to 314 West 127th Street in Manhattan Community District 10. The site is primarily zoned R72, with the exception of a small area on the western part of the site that's zoned R8, and an area on the east that is R72 with a C14 commercial overlay. The development site is comprised of 6 tax lots, 4 of which are city-owned, and 2 of which are owned by the Center for Urban Community Services, CUCS. The lots are currently vacant with the exception of a 4-story building, which you can see on the top right, which is a transitional residence operated by CUCS for homeless adults. Across West 127th from the development site is a 12-story residential building, and then directly adjacent to the site on the east is a 1-story former bank building that's now used as a church. The larger surrounding area has a mix of residential, institutional, and commercial uses. 125th Street, which is a major commercial corridor and a cultural destination, is just to the south. The St. Nicholas houses, which is a large NYCHA campus, is to the north, as is St. Nicholas Park. And an entrance to the ACBD 125th Street station is located just a few feet from the development site at the intersection of West 127th and St. Nicholas. So HPD proposes to convey the 4 city-owned parcels to CUCS, which would construct a 12-story building on the site. CUCS is a 35-year-old nonprofit that operates 15 supportive housing and 3 transitional housing developments in New York City, with 7 of these facilities located in northern Manhattan. CUCS was a pioneer of the supportive housing model, and it's also the Northern Manhattan Street Outreach Coordinator for the Department of Homeless Services. The proposed development would include 117 units in total and would be manned 24/7 by skilled professionals. On-site social services would be available solely for residents of the building, but no distinction would be made between residents of the affordable and the supportive units. Additional amenities would include a fitness room, laundry facility, lounge, community room, and rooftop garden. The building would rise to approximately 119 feet, not including bulkhead, and it would adhere to required front and rear setbacks. The cellar would contain social service offices and amenities. The first floor would contain residences, offices, and amenities, and floors 2 through 12 would be entirely residential. So the overall zoning floor area of the building would be approximately 97,000 square feet with a floor area ratio of 6.5. 6.5 is the allowable FAR for most community facility types, but this is a nonprofit institution with sleeping accommodation, and as such, it's subject to a lower FAR of 3.44 in R72 and 6.02 in R8. So therefore, the applicant is requesting a special permit to apply an FAR of up to 6.5 to a nonprofit institution with sleeping accommodations at this site. The special permit is subject to conditions regarding access to light and air, provision of adequate services, and traffic impacts. And in addition to the special permit, the applicant is seeking a UDAAP designation, approval, and disposition of city-owned property. So Manhattan Community Board 10 voted 14-7 to recommend approval of the application with conditions. The conditions were that CUCS reach out to neighboring residents and businesses, and that the affordable units de-emphasize credit history when considering applications. The board further recommend that HPD strive to offer the units at a lower AMI of 30%. The Manhattan Borough President recommended to approve the application, and the full text of both recommendations is in your packages. So approval of the applications would help facilitate the construction of a 12-story building with a mix of supportive and affordable housing and a range of attendant social services. So I'll take any questions now.
Thank you, Joseph. Questions?
Oh.
I was disappointed.
I would hate to disappoint. It'd be great just to find out what the unit mix is tomorrow.
Sure, yeah, I had a slide on the unit mix, although I didn't read it out, but it's about 46 units are at 60% AMI.
Well, I mean, studios 1, 2,
Oh,
3,
sure, yeah. The applicant can
that
talk
would be
about
helpful.
that, yeah.
And then I'm assuming that a number of the units for formerly homeless individuals are actually for individuals at 30% of AMI or even below.
Right, exactly.
So that would be helpful. I mean, I think that pretty much addresses the community board's concern, but maybe if they can just be explicit about that, that'd be helpful.
Yeah.
And under current zoning 344, you could, I guess, only permit approximately half of the number of units that are proposed here.
Yes, it is. There's a sliver of R8, so it would be slightly more than 3.44, but yes, it would be much lower.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Joseph? Okay, this is on for hearing.
Thank you.
Item number 12 on the agenda, page 407, is a pre-hearing for a UDAAP designation, disposition of city-owned property, zoning map, and zoning text amendments in Manhattan Community District 7. Nabila Malik of the Manhattan office is back again to present.
Good afternoon. This is an application by HPD and the West Side Federation for Senior and Supportive Housing, known as WSFSSH, to facilitate the construction of 2 new 11-story buildings consisting of affordable and supportive housing and community facility uses on West 108th Street and Manhattan Valley in Community District 7. This was referred out on October 16th, and it's now back for pre-hearing review. So I'm going to take you through an abbreviated version of the presentation. The proposed actions include a zoning map amendment to change a portion of the project area from R8B to R8A, a zoning text amendment to Appendix F of the zoning resolution to map a mandatory inclusionary housing area, and the approval of a UDAAP and disposition of city-owned property. The development site is in red, and across from it, the Booker T. Washington Middle School and Playground on West 108th Street. Morningside Park and the Cathedral of St. John the Divine are 2 blocks north, and the surrounding area is well served by public transit with the 1 subway line on Broadway and 110th, and the B and C lines on Central Park West and 110th, as well as several bus routes. The project area includes Block 1863, lots 5, 10, 13, 17, and 26. It's bounded by Amsterdam to the west, Columbus to the east, and West 108th to the south, and it's currently part of a larger R8B zoning district. It has a total lot area of about 60,000 square feet. The disposition under the UDAAP involves lots 5, 13, and 26, which are HPD-owned public parking garages with a total of 675 spaces. Lot 5 is a 4-story garage with 250 spaces. Lot 13 is a 5-story garage with 300 spaces. And Lot 26 is a 3-story garage with 125 spaces. All 3 garages within the project area are active pursuant to month-to-month lease agreements between the garage operators and the city. Lot 10 is the Wisfish-owned 5-story Valley Lodge shelter, which provides transitional housing for homeless seniors with 92 shelter beds. And Lot 17 is occupied by the Annabelle Aviles Playground. Although the lot is part of the rezoning area, it's a public park under the sole jurisdiction of the Parks Department and not subject to zoning regulation. It's also not proposed for any redevelopment. So lots 5, 10, 13, and 26 constitute the development site as a result of the proposed actions. Lots 5, 10, and 13 make up the site of proposed Building 1, the western building, and Lot 26 is a site for proposed Building 2, the eastern building. These buildings would replace the existing garages and Valley Lodge shelter. The project area being rezoned is outlined with the dotted lines. So the proposed R8A rezoning would allow the applicant to build their proposed buildings at 5.3 FAR with total heights between 110 to 115 feet. The bulk of development for this project will be limited by HPD through restrictions in the land disposition agreement to 5.3 FAR for both buildings. The primary reason for this limit was based on early discussions with the community and keeping the site within context. The proposed project would consist of 2 buildings. Both the western building and the eastern building have frontage on the northern side of West 108th Street. The development is designed to provide approximately 277 units total of affordable and supportive housing, along with shelter facilities. The western building, planned for construction shortly after disposition, would contain 194 affordable housing units. Additionally, the development would upgrade the Valley Lodge shelter from 92 beds to 110 beds, with added community events and dining spaces on the ground floor and an office suite for Wisfish support services. Wisfish has acquired a site on the Upper West Side to temporarily house the Valley Lodge shelter during construction. The building's street wall would be entirely within 15 feet of the street line, and a total building height of 11 stories at approximately 115 feet, with a total floor area of about 160,000 square feet. There was a question on the design treatment of the building, so the architects will be at the hearing to address that. The eastern building would not be constructed until 5 years after construction begins on the western building and would provide a maximum of 81 units of senior supportive housing. The building would have a floor area of around 40,000 square feet. The street wall would be at the street line with a 26-foot setback and a total of 11 stories at around 110 feet. There was a previous question about the reason for the 5-year phasing. It would minimize disruption by extending the development timeline into 2 phases, as the EIS shows potentially greater impacts if both sites were under construction together. And the neighborhood would retain 125 parking spaces for those 5 years to ease the transition away from parking. As the lead agency for the environmental review, HPD released a notice of completion for the draft environmental impact statement on October 13th. The draft EIS identified a potential significant adverse impact for noise from construction associated with the proposed project. The potential for mitigation measures is being explored between the draft EIS and the final EIS. Based on the proposed development, the actions include a zoning map amendment to change a portion of the project area from R8B to R8A, since under the current R8B zoning, residential and community facility uses are capped at 4.0 FAR. a zoning text amendment to Appendix F to map a MIH area for option 2, and the approval of a UDAAP and disposition of city-owned property. In response to a previous question regarding mapping MIH, in order to ensure that MIH is applied consistently, decisions about its applicability are generally made on the basis of changes in residential FAR permitted by the underlying zoning, rather than based on other mechanisms that could limit bulk regulations. So in this case, it's appropriate to make the MIH applicability on the underlying zoning rather than restrictions in the land disposition agreement, since future modifications to that agreement will not be reviewed by the Commission. On December 5th, CB7 voted unanimously in favor for the proposal with 4 abstentions. The board conditioned their approval upon the execution and binding effectiveness of appropriate documents reflecting the proposed plan, the establishment of a community advisory group to coordinate construction issues, and the provision of a safe construction site and selection from a diverse local community hiring pool for construction workers and eventual support staff. CB7 also urged HPD to expedite the transfer of the eastern development to Wisfish prior to the proposed 5-year phasing. And on January 24th, the borough president issued a recommendation to approve the project. Thank you.
Questions from the commission? Yes, Commissioner Irfan.
I think this is very exciting. I would just hope that the architect, since you mentioned somebody from the design team would be coming to talk, could just explain, since it's really unclear from the photos and the renderings, the condition between the park and the building, whether or not there are any residential units on the ground floor, and how they interact, because it looks as if they're smack up next to each other. Right now it's a garage, so it doesn't seem that relevant, but when it's a residential building, it seems like that would be an important question.
Sure. And just what I can say to that is the ground floor of the western building will be sort of event and dining spaces as well as offices. So the residential units will begin above that. But yeah, the design team will be able to discuss in more detail.
Other questions or comments? Commissioner Delos.
It'd be great Wednesday if they could just give a breakdown of the, studios to multiple bedrooms. It'd be great.
Sure.
Thanks.
Others? Okay, so this is now ready to go to the public hearing on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Great. Item 13 on the agenda, page 471, is a pre-hearing review for a notice of intent to acquire office space in Manhattan Community District 1. Giving her first presentation before the commission is Allison Brown of the Manhattan office.
Thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners. So this is a notice of intent by the New York City Department of Citywide Administrative Services pursuant to Section 195 of the New York City Charter to acquire 50,000 square feet of office space at 255 Greenwich Street, located in Lower Manhattan, Community District 1. The acquisition of the space will be used to house the offices of the New York City Campaign Finance Board. 255 Greenwich Street, shown in the dotted line on this diagram. Here, is a 13-story, 620,000 square foot office building occupying the full block bounded by Greenwich Street, Murray Street, West Broadway, and Park Place. To the east of the site is City Hall and City Hall Park. To the north, Tribeca. To the west is Battery Park City, and to the south is the World Trade Center. The site is located in a C64 zoning district in the special Lower Manhattan district. Surrounding land uses generally comprise of commercial offices, retail, community facilities, and residential uses. The immediate area is well served by public transit with access to several bus lines, the 123, ACE, and RW subway lines, PATH trains, and several ferry services to New Jersey, all within walking distance. The Campaign Finance Board currently occupies 20,000 square feet of the office space on the 12th floor of 100 Church Street, shown here in blue. The Campaign Finance Board is an independent city agency made up of a board of 5 members and 125 staff. The CFB publishes public information about money raised and spent in city elections by candidates and independent spenders. The agency engages and informs voters through community outreach and advocates for legislative changes to registration and voting processes. On a weekly basis, the CFB welcomes over 40 visitors to its office, including members of the general public, members of the press, representative campaigns, and elected officials. The applicant states that the size and layout of the office area and training rooms at 100 Church Street are insufficient in allowing the CFB to perform effectively and efficiently in their daily functions. The insufficient space of training rooms and the ineffective operations of heating and cooling systems have caused added costs to the agency. DCAS is requesting the acquisition of approximately 50,000 square feet of the entire fourth floor of 255 Greenwich Street, shown here in red. The space will provide for the relocation of the entire Campaign Finance Board staff. The CFB's proposed relocation allows the agency to remain easily publicly accessible to multiple forms of public transit, as well as in close proximity to City Hall, the City Council offices, and the New York City Board of Elections. The proposed office space at 255 Greenwich Street includes sufficient workspace for all staff, as well as in large public meeting rooms, a large training room, and individual consultation rooms. The agency will predominantly utilize the proposed space during normal business hours, but there will also be work after hours and on weekends. During election years, there is an expected increase in off-peak work hours by staff and visitor traffic to the site. 255 Greenwich Street provides 24/7 access to tenants and visitors of tenants, and parking will not be accessible to staff. Other tenants currently in the building include the Office of Management and Budgets, the New York City Actuary, Department of Information Technology and Telecommunication, and the City University of New York. The relocation of the Campaign Finance Board to 255 Greenwich Street will allow for sufficient space to suit the current and future needs of the CFB. The site is currently utilized by a private tenant. Upon their planned departure, the space will need to be renovated to suit the needs of the CFB. Manhattan Community Board 1 issued a resolution unanimously in favor of the proposed office space acquisition, and representatives from DCAS and the CFB will be available on the January 31st public hearing to answer any questions. Thank you.
Questions or comments from the commission? Commissioner, Vice Chair Knuckles.
I should probably know the answer to this, but it's been a long time. Is the CFB precluded from being in government-owned space because of their mandate as opposed to private space that's financed by the government?
I actually do not know the answer to that, but the applicant can answer that on Wednesday.
Well, will someone ask it? Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Irfan.
Thanks. I'm sure there'll be a reasonable answer to this, but when an agency goes from 20,000 square feet to 50,000 square feet, it does lend itself to some questions. So among them are how often are the trainings held and for how many people, and how much of the additional space is for the trainings? And then finally, because they raised it as a point of contention for their other space, will they have independent access to heating and cooling in off hours?
In regards to the space, I think the applicant can go into more detail on Wednesday. Moving to this space allows the public meetings to be larger so that there doesn't need to be repetitive public meetings and essentially a waste of time for the staff. The new space allows for them to adjust the heating and cooling for their floor independently as opposed to the entire building, which was the case in the old office space.
Other questions? I was actually struck by the fact that the community board resolution was that they don't oppose. And was that, should we read something into that?
I don't know. Is that how they write them? This is the first one I've seen, so.
We'll go to a public hearing on Wednesday.
Great, thank you.
Item number 14 on the agenda, page 480, is a pre-hearing review for a zoning map amendment in Brooklyn Community District 8. Jonah Rogoff of the Brooklyn office is here to present.
Good afternoon. This is an application that was certified on October 30th, 2017 and returning for pre-hearing. The applicant, Silver Shore Properties 78 LLC, proposes a zoning map amendment to change an R6B district to an R6A/C2-4 district in order to convert part of an underutilized ground floor parking area within an existing building to commercial use, and also bring an adjacent commercial use into conformance with zoning. I'll just quickly go through an abbreviated version of the project. So the project site is located within the Prospect Heights neighborhood of Brooklyn Community District 8. The surrounding area is predominantly residential with mixed-use buildings located primarily along Washington Avenue, which serves as a commercial corridor. In 1994, an area-wide study of Prospect Heights contextually rezoned much of the area and mapped the subject block with an R6A C24 district and an R6B district beyond 100 feet of Washington Avenue. The area is very well served by public transit. It's located less than a quarter of a mile from the C subway line, and there are multiple bus routes within a short distance. The project area is bounded by Dean Street to the south, Pacific Street to the north, Underhill Avenue to the west, and Washington Avenue to the east. And the boundaries would essentially extend an R6A C24 district over the R6B portion of the block. The project site includes 2 residential condominium buildings, which have a total of 39 dwelling units and a combined FAR of 2.75. The project area also includes 2 lots with an existing residential building located here and a mixed-use building here with ground floor retail, both of which have FARs above what's permitted in the current and proposed rezoning. Here's a view of the project site along the Underhill Avenue frontage. A view of the buildings at the corner of Dean Street and Underhill Avenue. And then a view of the project site's Dean Street frontage and the Washington Avenue corridor shown on the bottom. And lastly, a view of the project site facing the corner of Washington and Dean. Along the Washington Avenue frontage, on the bottom here, you can see there's currently a ground floor space that's heavily underutilized as parking. The existing floor plan above shows this ground floor parking area, which is permitted but not required parking. At the request of the building's condo association, the applicant seeks to convert a large portion of the parking area to commercial use in order to activate the streetscape and more fully utilize the space. Just a few renderings of this shows the existing building and then the ground floor space being outfitted with commercial, and then a more close-up of that. To facilitate the proposed conversion, the applicant seeks a zoning map amendment to extend an R6A C24 district over the entire block, which would effectively generate floor area that could be used to convert the ground floor to commercial. The action would also bring an existing commercial space on an adjacent lot into conformance with zoning. During public review, Community Board 8 voted 16 in favor, 8 opposed, and no abstentions to approve the application with no conditions. Borough President Eric Adams voted to approve the application with 2 conditions. First, that the applicant demonstrate an effort to purchase additional development rights that would enable the entire conversion of the existing ground floor accessory garage to commercial or community facility use in a space that fully qualifies as zoning floor area. And second, that the applicant reach out to supermarket operators of smaller establishments that feature affordable, healthy foods. Just 2 quick follow-ups to questions at certification. First, the floor to ceiling height along the commercial portion is roughly 10 feet. The applicants will be able to elaborate on that further. It's partially below grade, so it appears shorter from the rendering. And then there's also a small slope along Washington Avenue, and they can elaborate further on that. Second, the 2 buildings within the project area on the corner of Dean Street and Underhill do contain rent-stabilized units according to the online database available by the state. However, the proposed zoning change would not result in any development potential on these sites, since the buildings are currently overbuilt and will remain overbuilt with the proposed action. That concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Questions? Yes, Commissioner Dweck.
Can you clarify a little more on the Borough President's request for creating a fresh market here? I understand that it's it falls short of the minimum requirement in space, and can you or can the applicant certainly speak to what efforts they've made to try and comply with the BP's recommendations?
Yes, absolutely. I'll convey. As far as the fresh designation, because the total space is less than 6,000 square feet, it's roughly 4,000. It wouldn't be able to qualify for a fresh certification. But then, as far as the operator of the space and whether I can have them respond to that more fully at the public hearing.
Right. In general, just, I saw a press release from the BP's office today. They're a major proponent of fresh markets, certainly in Brooklyn. And I think that we've seen the results over the last 10 years of this program, where you have a lot more options. Where in the old days, you used to have a lot of canned food. Today, we're seeing a lot more markets. And the more there are, the more that are created, the more the competition is, the prices will come down. And so just to reinforce, the BP's is a major proponent of fresh markets. So if we can have some clarification from the applicant on Wednesday, that would be very, very welcome.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Commissioner Levin.
Essentially, my question is, why are we not mapping MIH here? Recognizing that we're not talking about new development, this is a relatively new building, but following up on Nabila's explanation about when MIH gets mapped, she was talking about the West 108th Street project, which was going from R8B to R8A, which I realize is a different scale, but we're talking about a 50% increase in floor area potential here, so why wouldn't we map MIH?
So we actually worked very closely with Council's office. This was a fundamental question when we were processing the application. One of the major factors was just the overall size of the rezoning area. I believe it's about, I can confirm,
because
but
it's just that sliver of it's not the
very
whole
small
building site.
I'll go to the tax map. And then also the development potential would be very small. And we usually, I don't want to speak for, I think it's a larger question, but generally our criteria is that if it wouldn't result in a potential for at least for 10 or more residential units or 12,500 feet. So because the overall potential from both the development site and the other sites wouldn't result in that, we didn't feel that it was appropriate to map MIH. And then another consideration was just the overall character of Prospect Heights, and we wanted to, be cognizant of a rezoning that also kind of matches what we've heard in the community.
I want to thank Commissioner Levin for her question, because we do always look for any opportunity to map MIH when it's appropriate and meets the criteria.
No, I knew you had to have a good reason here. You wouldn't have let this one just slide by. But Jonah's answer and also Nabila's makes me realize, if the agency has a methodology, a factor sheet, or, rules of the game that are written down, I think it would be helpful for the commission also to know what the criteria are, what are the things you check off your list as you try to decide whether an MIH mapping is appropriate.
Perhaps at a future review session, when we don't have as many items on the agenda, it might be useful to have a presentation on that. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Commissioner Deleuze.
I just want to point out that this is about 8 or 9 blocks from the earlier fresh proposal closer to Eastern Parkway. It's literally that close.
Any other comments? Yeah.
I guess it's worth asking about the split vote at the community board. First off, it looks like they didn't have a quorum, but We've never stood on ceremony there, but it looks like it was very split.
Yes, so I immediately reached out to the community board for more information. My understanding is that because of the kind of the issues regarding 805 Washington Avenue, they both heard on the same date. The board was a little bit more suspicious of food markets, but in later conversations, my understanding is that the land use committee helped kind of sway the board and fully understanding what the actions are here, the distinction between the rezoning and the authorization, and they actually didn't provide any conditions. I think there was overall a consensus that this was appropriate, and the applicants can kind of speak to that more at Wednesday's public hearing.
Are we expecting representatives from the community board at the hearing on Wednesday? Do you know?
Not to my knowledge, just the applicant and the representative of the condo association.
It might be helpful.
We can certainly make the request.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, so this is the final item on our agenda today that will be sent to a public hearing on Wednesday.
Item 15 on our agenda is a council modification for 587 and 597 Bergen Street rezoning. The council proposes to remove the MIH option 2 from the application, leaving only MIH option 1. Jonah is present if there are any questions.
And Ryan, would you want to explain how we propose to deal with these?
Yeah. I've discussed with some of the other commissioners prior to the review session, but where we have a council modification that is simply tinkering with the MIH options, we think it's most appropriate to send a memo to the commission prior to the review session, and then we will just schedule it for a decision.
If there are any questions, then we would be glad to have the members of the team present. But what we realized was that we frequently will have members from our borough offices seated here just for this item, and then there aren't questions because the modification is so straightforward. And so with that, I'll ask for an assent by show of hands to send a letter to the City Council saying that the proposed modification is within scope. Okay, approved. Thank you.
Okay. For future votes for January 31st, staff have prepared reports for the Omega Sci-Fi Early Childhood Education Center, Rockaway Boulevard Senior Center, the Concerned Parents of Jamaica Early Childhood Learning Center, and the All My Children Daycare Center 4, and also for 66 Allen Street. Decisions are also scheduled on January 31st for 211 East 43rd Street, which is the Community District 6 office space.
I would just note on this one that given the strong support for the request by the community board, we're bringing it back at the next available moment because there was absolutely.
The Interborough Rapid Transit Powerhouse landmark, the Empire State Dairy Company Buildings landmark, and a Bartlett, Catan, Ellingtonville on Staten Island, which I believe is a authorization and school seat certification for under South Richmond. Did you want to speak?
Is that okay?
Yeah, please. That's why I read it.
Thank you so much. So the Staten Island Borough President didn't support the zoning lot. Thank you. The Staten Island Borough President didn't support the zoning lot subdivision associated with this proposal, and he doesn't support the modification of topography. And it's due to one reason that the fire department stated at a joint review that there was inadequate access on the site plan. So I just wanted to know if staff could explain to us maybe what, in worst case scenario, the applicant goes to the fire department and they don't approve it.
Sure. So this is an application for authorization for the modification of topography under the South Richmond Special District. So the applicants have asked that this be advanced at this time. We have discussed with them, as you mentioned at our joint review meeting, that there is this outstanding FDNY access issue. They feel confident that they can resolve that as a technical matter with FDNY as the process continues to unfold. So, they feel confident advancing at this time, but, they would, if they weren't able to come up with a solution to FDNY, they would have to come back and sort of look for other options on providing access to future homes, future development on this site.
What I might note is that applicants frequently decide how the timing of which permits they want to approve then, permits they want to pursue at which time. And we worked closely with the Borough President's office, noting this concern about the fact that an FDNY permit had not yet been obtained. And as a result of those useful discussions, we now note very specifically on the letter that we send that this cannot be interpreted as granting or suggesting that there should be granted any other of the permits. And certainly, if the FDNY's concerns aren't met, subdivision just doesn't go forward. And so it was on that basis of not dictating to the applicants the order in which they needed to pursue their permits.
And thank you for that, Chair.
So can I
Of course.
It's funny how these, it was on, it must have been on, I just turned it off. It's funny how some issues that come by us and then there's one that makes you think completely differently about an application. So is there a gatekeeper of this process? I mean, I think the public's perception, and clearly, obviously it seems to be, not to speak for the borough president, but that we are, as the planners, right, we're the planning department and the commission, that there is some sort of global view that we're giving this, not just, obviously certain things are within our particular purview and that we're actually acting on, but that there's, I would guess, an expectation that we are looking at this application from a planning perspective, even if we're not voting on it. In fact, in the documentation, we are also provided, I'll call it a site plan for this sort of project. And we are also sort of, we depict the action we're taking as facilitating something beyond the, in this case, topography, or in other cases, a subdivision and things like that. So I feel like in the package that we provide, and perhaps this is a language issue and an articulation issue for us to be thinking about in the future, that there's an expectation we're looking at this bigger than the one act that we may be taking that's very narrow. And in this case, the agency, sister agency to the department that's making sort of, that's highlighting this is a public safety agency. It's not merely parks, or, I mean, I'm not to minimize any agency's jurisdiction, but it isn't DEP saying, where do we put the sewer line? Or it isn't, you know, again, DOT saying I have no place to put a street sign. It's the fire department. And so, and that, of course, and they're saying that based on the plans that we also have included in our own package, that they are not supportive, and it is insufficient, that the site plan for this is somewhat lacking for them, and which, of course, raises public safety concerns if this continues on. What do we do with that? Do we just say, oh, we're just, you know, and there's no time frame on this, right? There's no clock ticking, although, again, I'd be the last person to suggest delaying, you know, an applicant's process, because I know this didn't just come to us last week. But what do we do with that? Because there are bigger issues here, and this is certainly not the only example, but this one just happens to be the example of the day.
Yeah, the way we do it, and again, these were very useful conversations with the borough president and his land use staff, is we make it explicit in a letter to the buildings, the Borough Commissioner for the Buildings Department, that this is not saying the site is ready to go. We're making a determination on a topographic modification. We've approved countless numbers of these where the fire department has not yet signed off.
Okay.
And then the applicant at that point can go one of two ways. One, they can stick with their proposal, which means they never get a building permit because they don't have a required sign-off, or they can work with the fire department. Again, our determinations on topography don't go to what you've properly identified as a core safety issue. Similarly, our determination doesn't go to whether a required Army Corps of Engineers permit is required, a DEP Blue Belt certification is required. And again, because the borough president helpfully raised this issue, we added language actually in all caps, which some people think of as shouting, to highlight the fact that our determination should not be taken. When you asked who is the ultimate control, what it comes down to is being able to get a building permit.
Right.
And it would then be at the Department of Buildings to make sure that all of the required sign-offs, including what we think is an important authorization of topographic modification, has been obtained.
Okay, that's very helpful. So here's a question that perhaps I should know the answer to. The granting of the topography modification authorization, can the topography be modified based on our action, but yet the construction of the project not occur subsequent? Or do you need the building permit to use what we have authorized? Or can they do it tomorrow if we act on it? You know, can they do it on Thursday if we act on it Wednesday, and then go through the process to find out that it can't be done?
They would still need to go to the Department of Buildings and pull the permits.
Before they can act on the authorization we've given them?
Yes, and I think that is when they would have to make the determination to the Department of Buildings that they have legal or safe fire access, and that FDNY is supportive of that.
So even just modifying the topography, not putting a foundation in the ground or anything like that?
Well, again, because it's related to the site plan approval that is associated with the authorization.
Okay, well, that's also helpful, because my concern would be that damage, some damage could be done to a parcel based on our authorization, and yet then the development doesn't actually occur, and now you have a disturbed parcel environment, okay. All right, well, that's very, very helpful. Okay, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Besser.
And when would the flood map revision take place? Prior to the approval?
So prior to, so as we understand it, FEMA is going through that process in the next couple of months, and that would be complete before they would get permits from the Department of Buildings.
And I want to...
Okay, and that is at FEMA's discretion we understand it to be that timing, but of course they control the process.
I was going to comment that FEMA's timeframes frequently shift.
Thank you for the clarification.
And I also want to thank Commissioner Besser for raising these questions. It was a healthy discussion of how we look at the request for CPC authorizations on Staten Island.
For February 12th, staff have prepared reports for 3510 Astoria Boulevard in Queens. And I will note that the R61 text amendment has been withdrawn, just so that you understand that the effect on the zoning change in Queens, the Astoria Boulevard, is that the underlying residential equivalent will then just be R6, which actually doesn't change the building at all. It was always the same FARs.
I would note on this, just to give the commission some background on it, that as we heard at prior review sessions at the public hearing, that this was an instance of our identifying a cleanup in the zoning resolution that would make it easier to not have to, on a site-by-site basis, do the research of what the commission approved. We thought that a good vehicle would be to bring it forward at the same time as the Astoria Boulevard rezoning. Now, this particular rezoning did not require the use of this new feature, so it really was our good governance. Given the community board vote, the council members' concerns, the borough president's concerns, we did not want to jeopardize what we thought was a good private application that had received support. And so what we will do is the next time that we see this come forward, and in particular, I would suspect in connection with a rezoning that requires this R61 text amendment, we will again bring it forward. We have to admit to a little bit of disappointment because we thought that this was a good opportunity to clean up the zoning resolution going forward. But as it's not essential and we don't want to jeopardize a good project that is an appropriate opportunity for affordable housing, we've chosen to withdraw the R61 text amendment.
I appreciate that, and I also appreciate that the thought is to attach it to a public application in the future. Is that my understanding?
No, it might be also
with a private application.
With a private application. Okay. I do think in this instance, this was it's a complicated amendment. I think we've become smarter as a result of our discussions with the commission in how we can explain it the next time that we go out with it, and hopefully not raise some of the concerns that were engendered this time around.
For post-hearing follow-ups, we have the Spofford campus redevelopment, and Justin is present. Do you have a presentation? No, just any questions? Okay. Also for post-hearing follow-up, the Gowanus Canal CSO facility. Katie is present to answer any questions.
Given DEP's, hi, thank you. Given DEP's follow-up letter where they corrected the above grade, is there a section drawing that we can see from DEP that they can provide? Because I think that was based on testimony that they provided to the Public Design Commission that maybe has been modified.
I see. Yeah, I think there have been some modifications since they last presented to PDC. I'll check in with them to see if there's something that is as accurate as possible that they can share now.
Yeah, that shows the difference in height. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll do.
Okay. The Friends of Crown Heights 11 in Brooklyn District 9. This is the early child.
Yes, Commissioner Levin. I don't really have a question about that application, but the memo that Sarah sent us, or that was in our package, raised another series of questions for me. The memo addresses why it is that the briefing sheet had a variety of different numbers for the capacity of this space, and the answer is that ACS budgets for a certain number, and then there's a license capacity that serves other contracts held by the provider, including the Department of Education and private pay enrollees. Made me realize that when we get these applications, we're looking at physical space, and we're assuming that the city is leasing the entire space. In fact, that's often how it is presented to us. But this memo kind of says, oh, well, don't you worry about that. We're only having to do this because of the budgeted number that ACS has. Then I realized that I understand that many of these early learn and Head Start spaces are being transitioned from ACS to the Department of Education. And the Department of Education is a state agency exempt from UDAAP. So what's that going to do to our pipeline of these applications?
This is actually a question that we just learned of the transition recently, and is something that we're looking at internally to determine what are the implications for us. On the one hand, this is consistent with questions that we've heard from the commission of how do we integrate for pre-K and now 3K. I think there have been suggestions of having a common branding, and moving it to the DOE does move in that direction of suggesting that it is a continuum. As far as what the implications are for the commission, that is something that we're looking at, and today we don't know the answer, but we'll come back.
Yeah, but I think
Thank you for flagging it.
I think it's very important that we somehow retain the public oversight that we have of these spaces, because as we've come to learn over the last, 6, 8 years that we've been doing these renewals, these are some compromised spaces that the city is holding together, and they're essential education facilities, for some of our most vulnerable populations. And it would be a real shame to lose the public oversight that the ULURP process affords us to be sure that these spaces are as good as they can be.
It's an interesting mix of, I think that there are things to be gained by putting it in an educational context. And we need to learn more about, one, what is intended to be transferred, what is the time frame, is it all of the facilities? At this point, we have questions about it. Yes, Commissioner Efron.
It also begs the question of our other responsibility about school seats and whether or not pre-K and 3K are, if they're really part of Department of Education, whether we have a responsibility or a role in determining school seats for those kids, which would be an entirely different situation since those are new seats.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting and a question probably for our lawyers as to what counts as a school seat and whether a pre-K and a 3K is a school seat.
Just I would note, independent of our work, I think it also has financial implications for contract providers. One degree of funding gets provided through ACS, and I think some providers are anticipating a real diminution in funding with this shift. So we could see a lot of movement in how this population is served.
So Sarah, if you thought you had an interesting, complex portfolio before, I think it's gotten that much more interesting and complex. And I can't promise that it will be at our next review session, but we'll come back when we have a better handle on this.
It's not an issue, not relevant to the application that's before us.
Okay. The Queensbridge Early Childhood Development Center also has a pre-hearing, but it seems like this was the conversation for all of that. And last but not least, the paperless filing CAPA change. Dominic is here to update you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. So just a few quick things. One is that we put on your desk a letter from the New York City Bar Association, a comment letter for the rules expressing their approval. The letter notes that the paperless filing system would help reduce time and expense with regards to packages, filing packages, especially the large drawings, and how much time and cost and effort it takes to put some packages together. I also wanted to just talk to you about two quick things. One is that, particularly last week, we were considering some small modifications to the rules, specifically in two areas. One is having to do with, we wanted to clarify that when applicants submit applications, that all of the parts have to be there, including the fee. Now, we think the rules address that now, but we think we want to make the language a little clearer, and we just need a little more time to consider that, as well as we realize that a lot of applicants, because it's going to be paperless, are going to be submitting their fees electronically. And so most electronic funds transfer companies will charge a small fee. And we're considering maybe to include something in the rule that would express to applicants our seeker and ULURP fees are very detailed, and don't forget, there may be this other fee that your electronic funds transfers provider may charge you. So what we're going to do is we still want to think about the language for that, and also see what the Mayor's Office of Operations and the Law Department thinks about it. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to, we told you that the vote for this would happen on the 14th. We're going to postpone that to the 28th. We will have another review session in 2 weeks where we will talk to you if we do decide to make such modifications, what they are. You'll have enough time to take a look at them. And then hopefully, if they're acceptable, we can move towards the vote on the 28th of February. So I don't know if anyone has any questions.
You gonna be accepting Bitcoin?
Specifically, the rules will say Bitcoin. No.
It just struck us that we didn't see ourselves like merchants being in the business of eating the fee for an electronic payment.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
All right, this concludes the public review session for Monday, January 29th, 2018. The time is 4:16.
And I actually would note that Commissioner Marin sends his regrets. He isn't yet sure if it's a cold or the flu, but notes that in his many years on the commission, this is the first time he has ever missed a meeting.
And to note also that the Wednesday meeting is at 22 Reade Street. That's very important. Yes, this is the last. It's all here on the 12th and 14th is here.